the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device, it is, as always, wonderful to have your company. Now, we have an awful lot to get through in the next few hours, and I've got a top guest coming up in just a couple of moments, which, of course, is Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. But just a bit of a heads up, what's coming up in the next hour as well. We're going to be talking about Israel's strikes on Gaza, the heaviest since the ceasefire with Hamas began. 322 people believed to be dead or missing, but no one at the BBC or Sky bothered to mention what the purpose of the targets were of the attacks, which of course was to take out Hamas leaders. Also going to talk about Tory leader Kemi Badenoch in about half an hour. She's going to start a speech in which she's going to warn that the government's target of hitting net zero emissions by 2050 is a fantasy and it's going to bankrupt the country. Finally, the Tory leader seeing sense on this madness. Is there hope for that policy to be dropped by everybody? Plus, the Welfare Secretary Liz Kendall will announce this afternoon plans for £6 billion of benefit cuts, despite a growing Labour backlash. But will it go far enough? And Putin and Trump are going to have a conversation on the telephone around lunchtime today, in which they're going to discuss dividing up Ukraine's lands and assets. It's the first phone call since Kyiv agreed to the US ceasefire proposal. Well, I'm going to talk about all of that, plenty more besides. In particular, I want to hear from you about what Kemi Badenoch has said. He's going to say in the speech, but we had a preview of it. 2050 net zero target is a fantasy that would bankrupt Britain. What is your reaction? Are you relieved we got one of the two main party leaders actually admitting that this mad policy, by the way, which was always mad, always a fantasy, always unachievable, is likely to be dropped? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Was it a bit too late after, parties like Reform UK have been pushing this for a number of years? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK and your message to 87222. You can also get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Look forward to hearing from you on that. And, of course, I'm sure you want to get in touch about what Nigel Farage has to say in a couple of moments. Just also going to introduce to you, before we get to Nigel, Benjamin Butterworth, journalist and broadcaster, returning to the show after a hiatus. I believe you were somewhere else. There are other channels. Yes. But a regular on my breakfast show. Great to have you back in the studio.
Thank you so much. And I did 4 years on breakfast with you, so it's a pleasure to be back.
You did your time. You did your time, sir, on the early starts. It's a nice, easy start, this one. Right, well, let's get straight into the show. Get Benjamin's thoughts on what my first guest of this hour has to say. And he is, of course, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. Very big welcome to the show, Nigel.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Lots to talk about. Let's get straight to it. Yesterday, big press conference announcing these defecting councillors coming to your party, some of which the Tories say they'd already got rid of. They didn't defect. Some have been announced before. But either so, you are on a momentum. You're looking at being the favourites in the Runcorn by-election, looking at doing very well in the local elections. How important is this as a springboard for you and for your party, given your greater ambition to become the next Prime Minister of this country?
It's very important because we've got people that joined us yesterday. And yes, some had resigned in the previous few weeks. Over a dozen of them came yesterday for the very, very first time. I'd never met any of them before. They bring experience. You know, we had the former leader of Gloucestershire County Council join us. We had the serving leader of Ribble Valley District Council join us, others who'd been in local politics for 20 or 30 years. And we're a new, young, fresh party. Most of our branches, most of our candidates have never been in politics before. And that's great because it brings freshness, energy, a lack of cynicism. But we need some old lags who've got a bit of experience of running things. So, yeah, it's very important. I was pleased to do that yesterday. And I can tell you that there are dozens more councillors that have applied and are going through the pipeline right now.
Are you going to have the full 1,600 candidates to stand at the local elections? Because this is all part of the, if you want to be a serious party, you need to start making headway in local elections, of course, by-election as well. But you also need to start building a base in local government.
Well, we won't be standing in the City of London because that's run by independents. And the Isles of Scilly elections, I think we'll leave to the people of the Isles of Scilly.
We'll let that go.
So realistically, there are about 1,500 seats up. This time last year, Reform contested 12% of the seats in the local elections. My biggest mission since getting elected to Parliament 8 months ago has been to build a candidate network, to get people that want to stand, to get them vetted, to make sure they're suitable, to get branches formed. We've literally been building a national political party. It is our intention to stand in all of the seats. There might be one or two counties where we don't quite make it, but I tell you what, we pretty much will be fielding a full slate. And that is, in organisational terms, in the space of just 8 months, an incredible achievement.
OK, you've been riding high in the polls, but you know as well as I do, the electoral system in this country, first past the post, means that actually you need to be getting well above 30% to be making serious headway as a party. How damaging, look, this is the elephant in the room, and it was the elephant in the room yesterday and has been for the last 2 weeks, how damaging has the spat with Rupert Lowe, one of your 5 MPs now suspended from the party? We're told no route back for him. How damaging has that spat been to the chances of Reform doing well in not just the local elections, by-elections and future general election?
Well, the timing of this is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I didn't know that he'd been referred to this parliamentary committee over allegations of bullying in his offices.
Really? No one told you?
No.
Wouldn't your chief whip, Lee Anderson, have known?
No, he didn't know. He didn't know. We found out later. But the comments made to the Daily Mail were that we're a protest party, etc.
You're messianic.
Yeah, they were all made 2.5 weeks before nominations opened for those local elections. I mean, if he'd wanted to, he couldn't have chose a time that was potentially more difficult. Now, has it caused some turbulence? Of course. Has it on the edges caused some people to be disconcerted? Yes. Does it make a fundamental difference to what we're going to do on May the 1st? No. And does it make almost any difference in the country? Virtually none whatsoever. So, obviously members think, well, he was doing some good stuff. He was doing some good work. He was putting out some good tweets. Why is this happening to him? I generally find in these situations, in the fullness of time, we're going to get the report from an independent King's Council, a parliamentary committee at some point in time, maybe months down the road, will look at it, and let's find out the truth. Let's find out the truth.
OK, but was he basically, to all intents and purposes, thrown out? You said suspended. He's not coming back to the party. You know that. I know that. Everyone knows that. He's thrown out of the party. Was it over these allegations, which he, of course, has denied? I need to stress that. Even allegations made to the police from your party by Zia Yusuf about violent threats. Was it a personality clash with you? Did you just not like him calling you messianic, Nigel? Or was it policy differences? Because one of the things a lot of critics online are saying, and yeah, online, not necessarily the same as real life, are saying Nigel Farage has gone soft on immigration. What has Rupert Lowe said that is a problem?
Yeah. Oh, deporting entire communities, some of whom are born in Britain, I think is, how shall I put it diplomatically? Tricky, wrong, actually, at every level. And I think, look, I don't want asylum seekers. I don't want young men crossing the English Channel. Hey, Julia, I was the one that blew the whistle on this over 4 years ago. But the idea that you take them, dump them on a Scottish island with a minimal amount of food and let the midges do the rest. I mean, this is all language that's been used in the last couple of weeks. And frankly, it's just not responsible language.
You don't think that there's an appeal there because it's online? People are applauding and very much supportive of it.
A lot of those are very new accounts, which is really interesting. So this has been taken online as an opportunity by some to try and disrupt as much as they possibly can. And there is an online community that literally want to fight a war against every Islamic person in this country. I want to fight a war against Islamism and the dangers that brings. So policy differences have got wider in the last 2 weeks, not narrower. But initially, he was suspended from the whip for being under investigation. Just as if you were accused in News UK of serious malpractice, they'd put you on gardening leave, Julia, and wait and find out what the verdict was.
OK, let me just put one final point on this issue. Ben Habib, you get also somebody who used to be deputy leader of the party. No love lost between you two men anymore. He tweeted last night, people keep saying Rupert Lowe and I should stop fighting for our country. They say Nigel Farage is super famous. We should vacate the field and leave it to him. I think he might be referring to my Sun column last Friday. Here's the thing, he says, Farage is incapable of saving the UK. In office, he would do massive damage. We love our country. We'll fight on. Are you incapable of saving the UK, and would you do massive damage in office?
Is this the same Ben Habib who lost election after election? Is this the same Ben Habib who, when he was deputy leader of the party, failed to get any of the candidates vetted, which caused us such problems at the general election, and failed to get us to stand in more than 12% of seats last year? Is that the same fella?
I think you've answered that. Right, well, let's talk about the future. Lots of talk at the weekend about uniting the right, about you meeting with Dominic Cummings. I mean, I thought he was your sworn enemy after the 2016 Brexit battles. Are you in any talks with anyone, Dominic Cummings included, about uniting the right so that we don't see a split of Reform voters and Tory voters at the next election and another Labour landslide?
Yes, you're quite right. Dominic Cummings and I had never got on. But he reached out to me and said, should we meet? Do you know what? I'm a far more forgiving and emollient character than you might think. And if there's an opportunity to bury the hatchet with somebody, do you know what? I will nearly always take it. So we met. We talked about the state of the Conservative Party, about the, as he sees it, pretty terminal decline that it's in. I talked to him about the blob. You know, what's it like fighting the civil service? You're in government and they're not on your side. There was no discussion of uniting the right whatsoever. I think, well, you have to ask him, but, you know, what I took from it is Dominic thinks that the Conservative Party is literally in terminal decline and that it needs to be replaced.
Some hope, though, of the right, well, the right to returning in the Conservative Party, which has been Labour-like for many years. I think you and many of my audience would agree. Kemi Badenoch today, in about 15 minutes, going to give a speech. We've seen in advance of it, saying about how net zero and the target for 2050 is impossible. It would bankrupt the country. Said it's a fantasy. Do you welcome the leader of the Conservative Party has come on board to what it sounds like very close to your policy?
Her fantasy. It's her fantasy. She is an independent backbencher in 2015, voted for this, said that her constituents were delighted that she had done so. She then went on to vote for EV targets for cars and vans, which is now literally closing down the British car industry and over which we have to take rapid emergency action. She voted for legislation that is closing down our steel industry virtually as we speak. So she's one of the architects of this. She can't come along in a few years' time afterwards and say it's going to bankrupt us. I know. Richard Tice and I were telling you that back in 2015. So who do your viewers and listeners trust? Do they trust somebody who was the architect of this disaster and also, of course, far too high energy bills for everyone in the land? Or do they trust people that had the vision to see what a terrible mistake that was?
Isn't it better that any sinner repenteth?
No, because they'd let us down again. You know, if you elected them on that ticket, they'd revert back to where they were. We learnt that in 2019. They pretended in 2019 they were believers in Brexit, believers in border controls, believers in backing British business, and did the opposite. They cannot be trusted. End of. They're careerists. They're not in this out of principle. They chop and change their mind, frankly, with the wind.
OK, let me also talk about benefit reforms. Big announcement today, again in a couple of hours, from Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, finally going to get to some welfare reform regarding disability payments. Extraordinary. I mean, it's just an amazing statistic that 1 in 10 working age people in this country are claiming some sort of sickness or disability benefit. We're told she's going to be saving the region of £5 or £6 billion out of a whopping great bill. Does what we know, to the extent of what we know, what she's going to do, does that go far enough, or would you go further? What would reform do if you were in office?
This is one of the legacies, not just of the increasing size of the welfare state, but of the pandemic. The repeated lockdowns led to a culture where, you know, you're stuck in a 24th floor of an apartment block in Birmingham. You're not allowed out for more than an hour a day. And you ring up the GP, you get a Zoom consultation, you say, "Doc, I'm a bit depressed." Let's put you on disability benefits. And it happened, and almost another 1 million people went on disability, many of them very young people. who are being told effectively you're a victim. And once you think you're a victim, you tend to stay as a victim. And this, of course, all under a Conservative government. I wonder how Kemi would answer that. I have to say, I think it's a mistake for your own GP to be able to sign you off as disabled, because the job of a GP is actually, Julia, to sort of try and help and encourage patients whose families you might have been serving for decades. All of those assessments should have been done by people who were independent, who had no vested interest in that sense. And every single one of those Zoom consultations needs to be revised immediately and done on a face-to-face interview. And we're a civilized society, and we'll carry our weakest. But frankly, if you can get signed off on disability benefit for just being depressed, I mean, crikey, how many times would everybody listening to this show have qualified at some point?
Wow, that's a statement and a half. It's sunny out there. We're all cheerful today, Nigel.
No, come on. But the point I'm making is, Julia, we all have ups and downs in our life.
Yeah.
You know, we have grandparents die. We have, relationship breakups, or our kid gets ill, or whatever it is. We all go through those sort of black dog moments in life. But we have to come through them. We have to get out the other side. And if you're going through one of those and you are then diagnosed as being disabled effectively, it's much harder to shake yourself out of it.
The medicalising of normal human emotion. And what do you make? I mean, the Motability scheme, lots of people are just, absolutely shocked and stunned by, someone's got autism, they get a free car. It's bizarre. Talk Exclusive today has revealed that £8.8 million of taxpayers' money, money down the back of the sofa in terms of the full welfare bill, but everything adds up. £8.8 million has been spent on free driving lessons for PIP claimants, personal independence payment.
Look, the whole thing under 14 years of Conservative rule got hopelessly out of control. It's ironic to hear a Labour government talking about turning it around, and I wish them well. I wish them well. But I fear that their own backbenchers, and I fear that the leaching of votes to the hard left Greens and the Lib Dems will stop them from really carrying this through. And that is why I believe the UK needs a new and genuinely radical government prepared to think about everything.
Now, you've been cheerleading a lot of things that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have been doing in office, and an awful lot of us have been, in terms of Doge and tackling immigration. Clear successes there from that government. But you've had the big falling out with Elon Musk again, just dashing back to Rupert Lowe. Have you spoken to Donald Trump recently?
No, I haven't. I have spoken to people very close to him in senior positions. I haven't spoken to him. He's rather busy.
He is.
He's on with a lot of things.
But we were given the impression you were friends. Is he not offered any support to you?
For what?
Offering you support in your battles with Rupert Lowe, or or any of your policies?
I don't think you understand, you folks. You all work and live in media. You live in central London. You think the Rupert Lowe story is a big story.
Oh, I know. I get that most people have never heard of him. I get that.
I'm just wondering,
given how much his henchman Elon Musk has been attacking you, has he offered you any support? Like, don't worry, I'm still with you.
No, and I wouldn't ask for it. This is really, really at the edges stuff. If I wanted to pick up the phone and ring him or text him, I would. He's got a very important phone call today with Vladimir Putin. I want to see an end to this war. I just don't want to see Putin actually win too much territory. So let's see what happens.
OK, I was going to say, what terms would you accept that war?
Well, we want peace, obviously. We want peace. Putin should never have done what he's done. It's cost hundreds of thousands of lives. There needs to be an equitable and lasting peace.
But that's not what Putin wants. You think Trump is wrong on this, don't you? That Trump has given too much.
No, Trump is right to go for peace, and we don't.
Not at any cost.
We don't yet know what that side of the equation is. Don't underestimate this. He could be very tough on Putin, and I hope that he is.
OK, well, we should wait and see. Just finally, look, you've had success with the UKIP before, and success with the Brexit Party, and you're now an MP after all those years of trying. You're in power in terms as an MP, but you want proper power. You want to be Prime Minister. You've made no bones about this. You want to be replacing the Conservatives as a party on the right, rather than being a protest party that influences their policies. I asked you, I think about 20 years ago, what was the first thing you'd do, your first day in office, if you were elected Prime Minister? And your reply to me, do you remember?
Well, probably open a bottle of champagne.
You said you'd go to the pub. You said you'd go to the pub.
Well, there you are. I wasn't far out, was I?
Have things moved on? What would you do now if you were genuinely 28, 29, you got elected Prime Minister? Good knows what happens in British politics the next few years. What would you do the first day?
Go in with legislation to present to Parliament, have a King's speech as quickly as is humanly possible, free us from the shackles of the European Convention on Human Rights, get our sovereignty back in terms of our judiciary. Without doing that, there's almost no point to anything.
OK, Nigel Farage, MP, Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Really interesting to talk to you. Covered a lot of ground there. Love to hear your thoughts on what Nigel Farage had to say. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text talk to 87222. Message us on X at Talk to Me. I'm sure the messages on X are already coming in thick and fast. But let's get the first thoughts of journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, who's been listening to all of that. Now, I think it's safe to say that you're from the left. Nigel Farage is not your natural sort of home as a politician. Reform UK certainly isn't. What do you make of what you had to say?
Well, I think it's quite interesting because he's definitely right that Rupert Lowe is unknown by any normal person outside of Twitter. And I think two things have emerged here. One is his strategy on policy. So when he was asked about Rupert Lowe's comments about remigration, about entire ethnic groups and religious groups maybe being taken to other countries where they originally come from, he's being absolutely ardent on that because he knows, and you mentioned it, 30% where you get some serious number of MPs possible is not going to happen in this country if he has that kind of language.
A Tommy Robinson style policy approach.
Exactly. And if you listen to Nigel Farage, he doesn't talk about immigration anything like as much as he used to.
That's been one of the criticisms from his critics.
Exactly. He talks about net zero, he talks about welfare, because he's trying to put himself more near to the centre. He's not going after any more people on the hard right because he figures he's got as many of those voters as he's going to get. And so it's interesting that there's a certain moderation in him. But on the other side, what you're seeing, and the problem with what Rupert Lowe said in this idea that Farage is a messiah, is that let's look at the 20 years in politics he's had. It happens over and over again. In every party that he's run, he's been an extremely popular, charismatic leader, but he's been incapable of working with people around him. So if people are looking at him and say, could this guy be Prime Minister in 4 years? Well, actually, you can't keep a team of 5 people together. How can he keep a team of the 200
Isn't there an
MPs he wants?
argument, and I do think this is a big part of it, that sort of people who join Reform, sort of people who try and sort of make waves, who want to do something different and not just going through a party structure and sort of having a safe career, of a kind of, it's a technical term, awkward buggers.
Yes.
They're my favourite kind of people, people who just don't just sort of toe the line for the sake of it. And they find it quite difficult to get on with other people of a similar personality trait. And so that's kind of almost baked in to the project.
And maybe that's why Reform has a number of entrepreneurs, because they're kind of, outsiders, mavericks, they like to rip things up.
Isn't it better to have people who are like that as opposed to, I imagine Elon Musk is rather similar, rather than people who just sort of, you look at, a lot of the people going through the motions in the Tory party and the Labour Party who are just, the careerist politicians. They've gone through that route, university, special advisor, whatever.
But the thing is, we elect governments in this country and they have to be a team, otherwise it simply doesn't work. I mean, in the last couple of years, we saw that with the Tories. If you've got 12 different mavericks pulling in different directions, nothing gets done. And I think that would be the serious question. I mean, they've never run a council. They might run the Welsh Assembly next year because they're polling very well there. And I think that will be the test. Can they find people that can pull together as well as have strong views?
Very interesting. Love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts also on net zero. Kemi Badenoch saying that the 2050 net zero target, which she was among the many MPs who voted for it, but she says it's a fantasy and it would bankrupt the country. Well, I mean, people like me, Nigel Farage and others, have been saying this for a number of years because, we can add up. I mean, it's just that simple. You just have to have the grasp of a 6-year-old at maths to know that these figures never added up. What is your reaction to that? Do you welcome, a sinner who repenteth? Is it good that the Tories are finally getting senators? We get a proper choice in the next election on this massive policy which impacts all of our lives and our economy, and, by the way, would massively impact our freedoms if it did go any further. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
It's very bizarre, and of course, you know, the Muslim family are an upstanding family. The man is a GP, and there's no issue, and everybody's getting along fine. And we know that actually, at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of tension between different cultures going on. So this is it's a bit of a slap in the face, to be honest.
It's the Guardian reading BBC stuff, turning Britain, his modern history, if you like, into what they want it to be, what they'd love it to be, as opposed to what it actually is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's just coming up to 10:30. Lots of you want to have your say about particularly net zero, and Kemi Badenoch sort of, well, reneging on Tory policy, it would appear, in a speech she's about to start any moment now, where she's going to be talking about how net zero is basically a fantasy that would bankrupt the nation. Well, let's get your phone calls up. Jules is on the line in Bedford. She's called 0344 499 1000. Jules, he has called. Sorry, Jules, what do you want to say?
Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so exactly that point. What struck me was when you said a moment ago that we who've been opposed to net zero for years, we can add up. Yes, indeed, we can. But the reality is, so can Kemi Badenoch. She has known for years that what she's saying today is true. Either that or she's stupid. So either
we
one,
know she's not stupid.
Been trying to deceive us, or two, she's stupid. Either way, as Nigel Farage said, you cannot trust these people to follow through with what they say.
This is a very fair point. And again, I like Kemi Badenoch, and I think she stood up on some key issues which I feel strongly about. But it defies belief to me that anybody who's got half a brain, who pays any attention to this stuff, bearing in mind most of the MPs who voted for this stuff and still support it, they don't know. I mean, you could ask them 10 simple questions about climate change and facts and costs and things, and
exactly.
they wouldn't even, most of them don't even know that, like, the 2030 target is only electricity, not energy. I mean, people, they're so ignorant. It's frankly, it's criminal how ignorant they are, given that they're spending our money on it and bankrupting us on it, and impacting our ability to defend our country as well. But Kemi Badenoch's not stupid. She does know her stuff, and she said she's an engineer by training. She would know and would have known for a long time. Does that mean, do you say you agree with Nigel, like you couldn't trust her on it because you know that she lied before?
Yes, exactly. You cannot trust them to follow through with anything like this. As soon as they're given power, they will do exactly what they have always done. Remember those policies promising immigration in the tens of thousands when they had no intention of delivering it?
Simpler, happier times, Jules. Simpler, happier times. Can you imagine net immigration in the tens of thousands now? I mean, it's a pipe dream, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But this is the point. We get the promises, we give them the keys to number 10, and the first thing they do is the opposite.
Okay.
So no, they cannot be trusted, and they must not be trusted again.
Very interesting, Jules. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Dean, who is in Bridgehead. Dean, you want to talk about the interview with Nigel. What do you want to say?
Hello, Julia. How are you?
Very well, sir. What do you want to say, my love?
Yeah, I like to say, I'm from Wales, and everybody in Wales, which I know, is going to vote for reform for the Welsh Assembly.
Yeah. I mean, it's very likely they could take over the Welsh Government next year.
And I hope they do. I'm a Reform Party member, so is loads of my friends, and most of my military friends as well.
Yeah.
And basically, and what's happening is, and most of my friends who live in the valleys, all their grandparents and family have all been Labour supporters.
Yeah.
But they see what Labour's done to this country, that they'll all turn into Reform now as well.
Yeah.
So I think Reform are going to get a clean sweep.
Yeah, it is interesting, the Reform taking support from both of the major parties now.
Yes, exactly. And the demise of the steel industry in Wales, the demise of the M4 power station in Wales. We need this relief road built, which ain't going to happen, and it's choking Wales. and all this stuff it's crazy.
Yep.
So if reform win and do well in Wales and show what an actual EMP could do, Nigel Farage will have a clean sweep on England and will probably become the next Prime Minister.
Well, there you are then. Very interesting. That's what Dean's predicting. Love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. We'll get the thoughts of Ian Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader, about all that coming up in just a few moments. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:36 is the time. Let's welcome Sir Ian Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader, who joins us right now. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's talk about what your current party leader is talking about right this moment. She's speaking in central London, making a speech about her policy renewal programme. Finally going to get some policy. That's exciting. And we've had a preview of some of what she's going to say. In particular, she's talking about net zero, saying that net zero 2050 target for net zero emissions, carbon emissions to the UK is a fantasy. And she says unaffordable. Basically, it could bankrupt Britain and impoverish the British people. When do you think that your party leader came to this conclusion? Because as a caller of mine has just pointed out, this has been obvious to anyone from day one.
To be fair to her, she was one of those voices right early on that said setting these fixed targets simply wouldn't work. And I do remember having discussions with her about that, and she did say some stuff publicly about it. But, you know, the government under Theresa May had got this religion. Everybody in politics seems to have got this ludicrous religion that, that no matter what, we have to get to net zero when we are actually less than 1% of global emissions.
That's not even the argument against net zero, by the way.
Sorry?
That's not even the argument against net zero.
Well, it's against net zero. You always want to get to a cleaner atmosphere, that's true. But you have to do it if you're going to do it, and which we have been doing over the centuries, is to try and make sure you do it at a pace and not at a cost. And therefore, people need to have the choice, and they also need to know that this is not going to raise their cost of energy. And the problem has been that politicians generally of all parties seem to have lost the plot about this ideology. Once you get an ideology, you're completely dead. The reality is that net zero has become a kind of new religion. Yep. And she's right to say, look, let's live in the real world. You know, even if you want to get there, you're not going to get there. But to even try and get there is going to absolutely screw everybody in terms of energy costs.
But so that was always the case. There's no new information that's come out this week or last week or or last year or 3 years ago that has changed. That's always been the case. Do you understand why people, we just spoke to Nigel Farage, but also a caller who says he doesn't trust your party on this issue and basically says, look, but this has been known. And so we were being lied to. Why was Kemi Beg not, basically lying about this, saying that this was supporting this policy, not just in votes, but in speeches? When she stood for the Tory leadership, she didn't talk about dropping net zero. In which case, how can the Tories be trusted on this, even if they do drop this ludicrous policy?
Well, people that have never changed their mind on anything have never changed anything. The truth is, the reality. Julie, let me finish. The reality here is that it's all very well and good for Nigel Farage to stand out there, never having done anything before, and shout the odds on this. That's fine. Everybody can do that. But the reality is that the key is, what do you want to do about it? And the actual reality that has changed dramatically has been the arrival of Labour and Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband has put down the most ludicrous set of targets. We're importing stuff made by slave labour, and we also now have this absurd drive to net zero no matter what the cost. Now, that wasn't even the case before.
That was the Tory policy. The Tory policy then changed by 5 years, and he's brought it back forward by a year, by 5 years. It was the Tory policy.
By 5 years.
It was the Tory policy until a few years ago.
I'm one of those that argued that we should let these targets go. But my point I'm simply saying is, I absolutely think she is right to make this statement now. You can criticise her for not saying something, but you can't criticise her for saying what she believes. And the whole point about when you go into opposition, you have to look carefully at what you got wrong and why you did it and what you have to do to rectify that. That's politics. That's why you have governments coming in and opposition
I am thrilled
leaving.
that she is saying this. Everyone who starts talking sense on this issue is a good thing. I just don't believe that she didn't already know this.
I believe she did. And like everything else, you get swept along if you're not careful, if you want to stand out, by those who say somehow you're committing some cardinal sin if you open your mouth about it. I've been attacked more times than I can imagine about this, because I've said this is simply not doable, and why should we be doing this when the Chinese are busy burning fossil fuels to make our nice breast-beating electric cars and trash our car industry? So all these things have to be brought, and I've talked to her endlessly about this over the last few weeks, and she's clear about it. And the important thing, she's made this statement, and the reality is that the Conservative Party is together over this. And might not have been the case 6-7 months ago, but she's managed to get that to happen, which means we can persuade others of this too.
And we know that her biggest rival for the leadership, Robert Jenrick, he halfway through his campaign said he would drop the net zero target. So we seem to be moving there. Let's talk about a big story today in Parliament, though, in Westminster today, and that is, of course, the announcement from Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, around the lunchtime mark, when she's going to be announcing her reforms to disability benefits. Now, look, you played a crucial role as Work and Pension Secretary for many years under Cameron in terms of bringing in universal credit. Again, a policy widely disparaged by the left. When they got into power, didn't change any of it at all, which is very interesting. But they're talking about making £5 or £6 billion worth of cuts. Given that we've got 1 in 10 people of working age right now currently claiming sickness benefits, 1 million people born overseas here living on benefits, 9 million economically inactive people of working age. Is what they're planning to do enough?
No, and what they're planning to do has been cobbled together in a hurry. And I think actually the figure they're pointing at, 5 billion, which when you think about the scale of the welfare spend is pretty derisory. I mean, when I was there, we had to get it under control. I saved in the scheme of things eventually about 32 billion out of the welfare budget. It was hard. We had to do it. We also reformed it by bringing in universal credit, and we ended up with the lowest number of workless households since records began. The thing that has destroyed a lot of that has been COVID, and the fact that everybody in a panic then eased off on every single check or balance. All the conditionality that I brought in, for which I was attacked by the Labour Party at the time heavily, I brought conditionality in so that people, if they didn't choose to take a job, if they didn't choose to move on, then they lost a large chunk of their benefit. And so the key to that is you need to have a stick and a carrot. The carrot is universal credit will help you get back to work with jobs advisors, but the stick is you lose your benefit if you don't want to play ball, which is the contract. And all of that was in place. So much of it was relaxed, We ballooned the money that we spent on people. We put in stupid programs, which were things like the furlough scheme, which were defrauded. All this stuff, we're now having to pick the pieces up for all of that. And the CSJ, Centre for Social Justice, which I set up, has come up with a brilliant a book about this, which says that we've lost now a generation of young kids who disappeared out of school at that time and are not in work, education or training. Over 140,000 is the increase in the last few years of those households that have nobody at all in work. This is the key, get them back to work. And I think Labour is trying to probe at that, but they're not getting it right. The key thing is you've got a lot more to save than 5 billion if you change the way that we bring people and condition to make sure that they're actually going to get into work. And so on that basis...
Oh, we've just lost you, Ian. So Ian, if you can hear us. I think, have we got you back? No. Oh, we've just dropped off. Hopefully we can get him back on. While we're trying to get his line back up, Benjamin Butterworth listening to that. And this is going to be a big battle on the Labour backbenches, though, isn't it? Because we know they'll be all wringing their hands and saying, oh, no, we can't do any of this. You're going to hurt the vulnerable. You're going to hurt the poor. Yeah, there's a handful of people on the sort of hard left of the Parliamentary Labour Party that are going to make this difficult. Diane Abbott has been doing the rounds complaining about that. But I don't think it's going to be such a backlash because it's a very agreeable set of MPs that Labour Party has at the moment. I think the question is how Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, introduces this. If it literally cuts the amount that the poorest get, then there's going to be anger. But if it tries to make it harder to get benefits, I think there might be some agreement. Again, those are two very different things. So, Ian, I think we've got you back, which is great.
I apologise, the internet went down.
Don't worry, we love tech in this country. We love it. But I just wanted to ask you, just finally, on the benefit issue, when you talk about the balance between the carrot and the stick, I think what a lot of people are amazed by is the fact that, once people are on, for instance, personal dependence payments, they're not required to even look for a job at all, especially when we know that the vast majority of people who've got onto that since lockdown are claiming to have mental health problems, depression, anxiety and the like, when most of us would understand actually work is good for you in those scenarios. How much of the stick should be used? Because a very good friend of mine who works at a benefits counter, and I've said to her, how do you know when people want to work? Because we're constantly told, all these people, they want to work, they just haven't been able to, they want to work, they haven't been able to get work. And she said, you can always tell if someone signs on and wants to work. And I said, how do you know? She goes, you don't see them again because they get a job.
Yeah, well, the vast majority of people who sign on get a job in, I think about 80% get a job in 6 months. So you're dealing with a hardcore of a subset of that are resistant to it. But you've got to have programs to get them into work. You've got to drag them into work to do to get to work and then make sure that they stick to that. That's all about what conditionality is about. The government, Labour government, has never been keen on conditionality, but they have to tighten it up. I've suggested in the pamphlet that we wrote over the weekend that they bring it in for what they call in-work conditionality, not just you've got to look at a job and take a job, but if you take a job for 15 hours or 16 hours, after a month or two, they step in and say, you've got to take 24 hours now. So either you get more hours at your job or you get more hours elsewhere, moving you up the whole time to get free of welfare. That's what's got to be done. But the main thing here is the sickness benefit, which is the problem. You say, you talked about PIP. PIP allows you to work. Yeah. So my suggestion
but only one in 6 people claiming it do work.
Yeah, well, the key thing is you've got to get jobs advisors into PIP now and start helping them. Lots of them just sit there and languish. Their condition gets worse. Yeah. So there are some who literally cannot take a job. But my point about this is there shouldn't really be a no-job position for anybody. Now that the health benefit, the sickness benefit is in universal credit for the first time. I argued for it years ago, but they didn't want to do it. That means you can put a job advisor on every single person claiming that benefit. Okay. That will make a big, big difference, a lot more than this. And the one reason why they're trying to put the 5 billion figure on, it's simply because Rachel Reeves has set her fiscal rule and she's broken it. That's why they only want 5 billion.
That's the number that they want.
It's got nothing to do with saving money for taxpayers.
Very, very interesting. Just finally, I want to go to international affairs. Today, we're expecting a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It's the first contact the two men have had directly since Zelensky had accepted that Ukraine would accept a 30-day ceasefire. How hopeful are you that there will be peace of some kind, temporary or long-term, in Ukraine? And how worried are you that Vladimir Putin is going to get everything that he wants?
I'm very worried about the latter. I'm very worried that Donald Trump doesn't really, I think, understand who Putin really is. Putin is an old KGB man who knows how to negotiate. He knows Trump's in a hurry. because Trump said, I'm going to get this done in double quick time. So when someone's in a hurry, the Russians always wait to the last moment and stick in conditions. And then you argue about the conditions, and then they stick in a few more. And the reality for him is that I just looked at a piece of work from somebody who said in previous negotiations, the readout in translation is that Putin is being rude about Trump in Russian. And Trump never reads the readouts. And that's because Putin knows what he's not going to give, which is the first place to go. And I'm very worried that Trump, to get this agreement, will start, all this talk about nuclear power stations being given to one side or the other. It's unbelievable. Territory given away. So these two could carve up the world like some 19th century potentates who think that it doesn't matter about small nations. So my real worry now is he doesn't sell the shop to get something for himself so he can get a Nobel Peace Prize. The answer is no. Ukraine matters. Its people matter. They're trying to be Democrats. They're not perfect. They're trying to get their corruption in order. They're not perfect, as all Soviet states were. But they are wanting to be a free, democratic nation. And if we don't support those sort of nations now, then we're not worth a damn in the West.
Sir Ian Duncan Smith, so appreciate you joining us, former Conservative Party leader. 10:49 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, going to talk about rather more meaty matters for us back home in Blighty. Potholes. The cost of filling in every single pothole in this country, a whopping, wait for it, £17 billion. That's up next. This is Talk.
Act is from 1951. The world is a very different place. Immigration and refugees are very, very different from what they were then. The French Interior Minister in 2021 said to Boris Johnson, this doesn't work for either of us. We need to set up a safe and legal route. We will process these people at our shores, and if it turns out they're legitimate, they have every right to come to England because they've been cleared to be an asylum seeker. We'll do it on your behalf. Boris Johnson fell out with Emmanuel Macron that week and decided not to go to the convention that he put on for the rest of the EU leaders. This could have been solved years ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Now, again, we talk about things like Ukraine. We'll be talking more about Israel. There's airstrikes and big picture stuff about benefit reform and net zero. I mean, these have a massive impact on our lives. But in terms of your day-to-day life, you know how I feel about bin collections. The other big thing for an awful lot of people, it's potholes, the state of our roads. They are not just in a terrible, dilapidated state. It's embarrassing for a first world state. They're dangerous. They're causing injuries to cyclists, to pedestrians and to motorists, and they cost a fortune to our cars. But they're also going to cost a fortune to ever repair. If they ever did get round to repairing them all, we are looking at an extraordinary bill of £17 billion. That's according to the annual Local Authority Road Maintenance Report commissioned by the Asphalt Industry Alliance. I imagine the asphalt industry will be quite keen on that work going ahead. Yeah. Let's talk about this with pothole campaigner, Mr. Pothole himself, of course, Mark Morell. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
This sum just keeps on going up. At some point, it's going to be the cost of, you know, the entire world, trillions to mend all the potholes, or we're just going to have so many potholes there won't be anything left to fill in because our roads will just all be potholes.
Exactly. I mean, to be honest, I'm sick of talking about it. The answers are fairly simple and straightforward. The thing is, you need to resurface your roads. The wearing surface of a road lasts 20 to 30 years. And in the report, quite clearly, it shows on average it's 93 years. So, you know, it's fairly easy. Resurface your roads, spend some of the road tax revenue, stop wasting it on things like £22 billion for carbon capture that doesn't work. Stop wasting it on, you know, we see all this attack on poor, you know, pensioners and wasting other things that are going on. You need to spend it on the roads, because there is a report that says that badly maintained roads is costing the UK economy £14.4 billion pounds.
And it does you know, the damage to the roads, it impacts, you know, road transport. Everything we buy eventually comes by road. It is an issue. But this is the thing, councils say we haven't got enough money. They're the people who are responsible for mending a lot of these roads. But I always notice, I mean, like, you know, our road is, my God, my road's been dug up so many times the last year. It got to the point where we just like, I don't think we just drove for about 6 months, just couldn't get out of the street. It was just madness. But some roads seem to be repaired all the time. And I'm always thinking, I wonder if a local councillor or a local council bigwig just happens to live in that street and that's why their road gets repaired. And other roads are just left literally to go to rack and ruin.
Yeah, I mean, I have had examples of that before with councillors and you know, even, you know, an ex-Prime Minister who had a road resurfaced near his house out in the west of Oxfordshire. I
wonder who that could be.
Yeah, he wouldn't come out in a tank with me after I tried to get him out to look at potholes because my friends reckon that the government are frightened to death of me. But anyway, the reality is that authorities have had to cut because we know the increasing cost and demand on, but there's a lot of waste. Tens of millions of pounds on poor quality repairs, repairing potholes in an area that's just failing. And unless you resurface the road, it's going to get worse and worse. And in that report, and I fully agree what they've said in the report, because I've done my own sense checks. Although it's the industry, and I agree with you, I was always jaundiced originally, but I did my own freedom of information requests. So their information is the best you've got. It's better than what the Department of Transport know. You know, if you actually ask them, what is the backlog? I don't think they have a clue. They've been criticised by committees. They've got no idea, no handle. And it's been successive governments, because the backlog was £3.75 billion in the year 2000 when Blair and Brown was in there. A minister wanted a 10-year plan to get rid of it. They didn't do it. Now at £17 billion, successive governments. Common thing in there, Department of Transport hasn't changed. Civil Service hasn't changed. They don't want the extra work.
Although the Transport Minister or Secretary seems to change roughly every 3 weeks. But this is the thing. This is very similar to, you know, getting work done on your own home. And there's a little bit of a hole, a little bit of a patch, a little bit of a leak in a pipe. And you think, oh, it's not too bad. Well, you could spend a few £100 now, or you could end up spending 20 grand later. And it's that sort of equivalent, isn't it? Spending the money, dealing with a small problem with a pothole now. But there's also an issue, though, is there not, with, you know, the water companies, the electricity company, the gas company, the broadband company. They just come along every couple of months and dig up another bit of road, and then tarmac it back badly. Is that part of the issue?
It is some of the issue, yes, because councils have cut back on inspectors that make sure they do it to the right standard. The legislation's there to do it. I mean, saying about Secretary of States for Transport, I've probably been through about 10 of them. I've embarrassed a number of them. Chris Grayling, when he was saying about we're going to force utilities to put all their cables and pipes in the footpath. I pointed out that the reason they're going in the carriageway is because the footpaths are full, and there's a thing going on for the last 40 years called N-jug. So they don't want to go in the road, it's dearer. But, you know, you can police it, but if you've cut the amount of inspectors, it's it's a short-term saving. You're costing the asset. No one values the asset. The road network's probably valued at about £750 billion in total. I think local roads are about 400 billion. But that investment, you need to spend it. A bit like you said, wooden window frame, crack, a little bit of repair regularly on that basis keeps it going. You leave it, you have to replace the whole window. And it's the same with our road network. And as I said, I've got no faith in any political party doing anything about it. And that's why, you know, I'm retiring. This is my last sign off. I said I'd do it. Is it
done? There's no point. You're fed up. Could you take on bin collections next for me?
I might be taking on PIP because my wife gets PIP and we've had to fight to get it. And now she may be caught up, even though she's got major spinal problems.
We may well talk to you about that. Mark Morrell, really appreciate it. Mr. Pothole, for now, thank you very much indeed. Benjamin Butterworth, I mean, I barely ever drive. But because I'm very lucky I live in central London. Most people drive to work, they drive the kids to school, they have to use their car, absolutely vital. An incredible number of roads are just completely unusable now.
Yeah, if only Louise Haigh had dropped that phone in a pothole, they might have been fixed.
Yes, former transport.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it summarises the British state, right? Short-term solutions, not the serious problems that we have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's gone on for years and years and years. And councils, again, don't spend money painting a crossing with rainbow colours if you haven't fixed all the potholes. I just genuinely think, like, none of the extra stuff until you've done the basics. That's what we want. I'd love to hear from you. This on all the topics we're talking about, particularly about Kemi Badenoch. Apparently she's woken up to the idea that net zero is a fantasy and would bankrupt Britain. Yay! What's your reaction to that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, thank you very much indeed for joining us. If you're just joining us, you've missed a very interesting conversation, I like to think so anyway, with Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader. Your reaction to that still coming in on 0344 499 1000. In particular, talking to him about some of the other topics we're talking about today, including the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch warning that the government's target of hitting net zero emissions by 2050 is an impossible fantasy, her words, that can only be achieved with a serious drop in our standard of living or by bankrupting us. I mean, the answer is bankrupting us. I'd love to hear your response to her speech. She's been giving that speech in central London. Do you welcome any sinner that repenteth? Or is it a little bit too little too late? As Nigel Farage said, and a caller has pointed out earlier, that actually, well, nothing's changed for her to change this view. So why did she support this policy only a few months ago, but now she's questioning it? And can you trust the Tories on this issue? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate, of course, and text costs £1, standard network rate message. You can also leave a message at the bottom of our YouTube page. Remember, of course, if you've not been watching us on YouTube, we do still exist in video. I brush my hair, not very well, put lippy on for you. If you want to take a look, you also get to see the wonderful, the lovely and brightly jumpered journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, who has returned to the fold after a hiatus where apparently there was another broadcaster involved. He left me for a rival broadcaster, but is back. Very good morning once again.
And if you have me back, I'll put Lippy on next time too.
I thought that was part of the contract deal, but I'm just saying. Anyway, other things we're going to talk about today. Israel has unleashed its heaviest strikes on Gaza since the ceasefire of Hamas began. This comes as talks on further Hamas hostages releases have stalled. The extensive strikes were targeting Hamas terrorist officials. Not that that's been mentioned by the BBC and Sky very much. They are talking about we've been told more than 400 people who have died or are still missing. That's according to Hamas officials. They don't mention, of course, how many of those will have actually been the targets of that operation. At least 10, we know, Hamas leadership figures were actually killed in that strike. They would have been surrounded, each of them, by numerous Hamas fighters. So we can certainly say that a good number of those people who were killed were clear military targets. This despite, of course, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy accusing Israel yesterday of breaking international law by blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. He is, of course, as usual, as he is pretty much about everything, wrong on that. Also going to be talking about the millions of people who are going to be summoned for annual weigh-ins at the GP under new NHS guidelines to tackle obesity. All that coming up, plenty more besides. Benjamin Butterworth, I mean, because we spoke to Nigel Farage at 10 o'clock, it's normally the time when we would be having a good yap about the biggest stories in town, so now it's good to be able to get a chance to talk about that. Let's talk first of all about Kemi Badenoch's speech, because we know what she's had to say. We haven't yet got to what Liz Kendall is going to say on benefits, but we'll come to that. But in terms of Kemi Badenoch, look, you're on the left, you're on the woke left, where you all still think this stuff is sane. I mean, it never was sane. It was always mad. It was always going to bankrupt us. It was always unachievable, impossible, too costly, and involve us getting poorer. Is it a good thing that the Tory leader has woken up to this? No, naturally, I don't think it is. And I also don't think it's where the country is. Because if you look at polling, especially before the last election, climate change was one of the top concerns. It's not. Boris Johnson understood that. Not. It is. We're a green and pleasant land, and it's on people's radar very strongly. It just isn't. There's ways of asking questions in polls. You know, if you're answering a poll out, are you concerned or not concerned about climate change? You have to say you are. The vast majority of people in this country, it's not in their top 1,000 issues. Well, I think as the world starts to face the real consequences. Wait a second, clarify. Are we burning? Yes, are we burning? Are we going to be in drought or are we drowning? It's so difficult to keep up with what. Are we? Yes, all of those. We've had many of the hottest temperatures ever recorded in annual. Well, ever recorded since 1880. Have been in the last 20 years. Coming out of an ice age. That was what we expect to happen. We've seen incredible flooding. Half of Bangladesh was flooded last year. Half of Bangladesh is flooded every year. There has been no increase in flooding. there has been no increase in flooding. Next.
When I was
go with wildfires. Have we had an increase in wildfires?
Well, I haven't mentioned wildfires, but
are you going to go with wildfires? Because that's the next one, because we haven't had an increase in wildfires.
Wildfires in January is pretty concerning, quite frankly.
Not unusual, and no increase in wildfires around the world.
Worse than any other year.
No, they're not worse than any other year. No, they're not.
About 18 months ago, I was in the foothills of the Himalayas, where they're saying their existence is being threatened because of the flooding that's happening from the mountains melting. This is incredibly
ice is all melting, apart from the fact that it's not all melting.
Well, but it is. It's incredibly dangerous. The overwhelming majority of scientists agree.
No, they don't.
And the thing is that
again,
what
made up stuff.
They do. They absolutely agree.
97%. Or was it 99 this week? It's so difficult to keep up.
I mean,
made up stat.
I would sooner listen to the 97% or the 99 than the 1%.
Stat. Not true.
The fact is that I think this offers a great opportunity for Britain, because one of the things we lead on is that...
Sorry, Ed Miliband, I didn't realise I'd invited you to the studio.
Yeah, you got lucky. We have an incredibly educated workforce, very good at technology, and we're actually...
great at innovation.
We're still a major industrial nation because we produce a lot of but we do, because we produce a lot of high-value things like arms and planes, and that's why I think we should lead on this stuff, because the technology, there's trillions of dollars to be made.
I am all for technology that is cleaner than old fossil fuels and getting rid of coal and things like that. Absolutely, all for it. However, not with a random target. 2050, that's a round number, or 2030, that's a round number, and not when it makes us poorer, it deindustrialises us, means that our energy bills are higher, which they are, means that our energy supply is insecure, which it is, and means that we're reliant on getting energy from abroad, and we're less secure defence-wise, because we can't produce our own, virgin steel. We can't actually afford to run manufacturing, and we're not able to keep the lights on of our own accord. We have to import energy. That is not what a first world country does.
Well, that's why solar panels and wind power are essential to try and fix that. We're an island. Wind is fantastic.
And when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine on a cold winter's day, when we need energy more than ever, what do you propose we do?
Well, that's why we should have built nuclear 10 years ago, because we would still need that, and it's an efficient form of energy.
We also need gas. 80% of our energy is not renewable energy.
That's why we need to change it.
There is no renewable technology that will replace the need for gas. Crucially gas and oil that is actually in existence yet.
Well, I mean, why have our bills gone through the roof? It's because we were so reliant on places like Russia, and
we didn't get our gas or oil from Russia.
It's the Ukraine war that's put those prices up. Because it hasn't
happened in America, where they've been fracking and they've been drilling for oil, and they've been, even though they talk a good game on net zero under Joe Biden, they still became the world's biggest net exporter of oil and gas. We stopped drilling for oil and gas in the North Sea. We didn't frack under our own nation, and we've got the ridiculous thing where we're relying on solar and wind, which we then have to double up to have the gas storage and the nuclear power to back it up for when it doesn't work. So we're paying twice for the same energy.
I mean, I do think that not going for North Sea oil and not issuing those licences that are currently going through courts about whether we should...
Well, that's a net zero policy.
I'm afraid I think that's a mistake.
Well, that's a net zero policy.
It's reported that Rachel Reeves also thinks that's a mistake. She wants the tax revenue from it.
She can add up too, apparently. All that experience as an economist, wink, wink.
But I think, there are so many technologies that this country can develop. Recently, I was with a Scottish entrepreneur who's developing motor cars made by fast cars, that is, racing cars, made by hydrogen, which is an incredibly efficient technology if we can develop it.
And when it's developed, let's move to that.
That would transform the impact of airplanes.
It's a when. But you do realise that we would hit our net zero targets if we basically closed down all our industry. No one had a fridge, no one had a car, couldn't get a train. We just gave up all of that. We went back and lived in the woods. And if we did get something, we imported it from China, where it's made solar panels and wind turbines in a coal-fired factory. We would actually hit our net zero targets if we did that. Would that be achieved? Would that be a good thing?
No, because
that's the only way you're going to do it.
What we have to do is change the technology we're using so that it doesn't have the impact on the environment. Even China has net zero target for 2060 and to peak in emissions in 2030.
They haven't actually got a date for it, and they're just playing along. They think it's hilarious because they know that the West is bankrupting itself, and they're supplying all of the electric cars and the solar panels and the things, and they are able to to do it all much more cheaply. They've built more coal-fired power stations and they're building solar stations. I mean, come on. You guys are living in a fantasy world.
I don't think so. And I think it's one of the things that's going to make Britain rich over the next decade.
Good luck with that. Just fine. Are you one of those, with all due respect, you know I love you, idiot young people, but this is not necessarily a bad thing for the gene pool, who's planning not to have children because, you know, the earth is dying? Because my only hope about that is Darwinian style. We are going to improve the human gene pool when all the stupid people's genes die out.
Well, the rest of humanity's decided whether I'll have kids because, I don't have a relationship.
There are still ways of doing it.
I don't plan to have kids, but I actually think we need more children in this country because our birth rate has fallen dramatically.
That's another topic we talk about. Right, I'm going to move on to something else. Let's go on to benefits. Can we sustain having 1 in 10 working age Brits claiming sickness benefits in this country? Liz Kendall, in about an hour and a bit's time, as the Work and Pension Secretary, is going to announce her cuts. As Ian Duncan Smith pointed out, we're talking about 5-6 billion quid in cuts to the welfare bill. It's a drop in. I mean, it's desirable, but nevertheless a drop in the ocean of what we need. How many of those 1 in 10 working age Brits should not be on sickness benefits is the question.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult question. I obviously don't know the answer to that.
I'd say a lot of them.
But, I mean, there's clearly a problem. It is unsustainable because the sums are expected to go up to about £70 billion in a couple of years. Now, that will be almost triple what it was pre-pandemic. And you have to ask the question, why is Britain the only major economy to have not returned to the employment levels pre-COVID? And I do think it is, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said this at the weekend, there clearly is some overdiagnosis. And the temptation is to think that overdiagnosis is a kind of kind thing. We are a sympathetic society. But actually, if you're telling people that their illness is so severe or so unresolvable that they can't go back to work, you're denying them the thing that brings you most satisfaction, that brings you most reward as a human being.
Self-respect and self-esteem, putting food on the table that you've paid for. But this is the thing, isn't it? A lot of people talk about it being kind, but it isn't a kindness. And the GPs who are the good GPs, I remember my mum's a GP, I've said this before now, she'd have patients who'd come in and they go, oh, no, not you, because I know you're not going to sign me off sick. Well, no, because you shouldn't be signed off sick. But an awful lot of GPs, again, it's a phone consultation or a Zoom consultation, and then it's a phone call with the benefits office, and people can look up online. You can literally Google, what do I need to say to get PIP payments? And you're never going to be asked to work again. You're on these payments. And a lot of people say, oh, well, it's only like 8-9 grand a year. Well, yeah, but it opens you up to a world of other payments, like the Motability Scheme and the like. I mean, the fact that you've got... it was at £8.8 million, this is Talk exclusive we've got today, £8.8 million of taxpayers' money down the back of the sofa in terms of the welfare budget, but nevertheless, 8.8 million quid being spent on driving lessons for PIP claimants. I mean, I've been paying for my daughter's driving lessons. They're unbelievably expensive. You're sitting there going, for the love of God, please learn how to drive quicker. By the way, you have to wait. In London, 6-month wait to get a driving test, and then she's had her driving test cancelled. So trying to get another one. I mean, it is unbelievably expensive to learn to drive. And we're paying for other people to be able to get driving lessons. What's that about?
The point of the independence payments is to try and let people, many of people on that are in work, and it's in order to help them do a job.
Again, this is another one of the lies.
I think it's the majority.
No, it's 1 in 6.
Oh, there was a politician yesterday saying that.
I know, lots of people say it. And again, even when people talk about people being in work where they're on benefits, most of them are working 1 day a week or 2 days a week. Oh, what a surprise! You can't support your family and pay your rent on 2 days' work a week.
I mean, there is another side to this. When it becomes the fact that it's definitely true that most people on universal credit do some paid work, but actually part of the problem is that they do. Most people on universal credit are in employment. That's definitely true. You can check it. I'm sure you'll correct me if it is wrong. And the problem is that wages have been too low compared to the cost of living, and therefore you end up having the state top it up. And so I do think the increase in the minimum wage might go some way to help that. But, that's one of the key problems, and I think we have to
But isn't the main issue that if you don't need to be on benefits, if you could take a job, just maybe not a job that you want or a job that pays as much as you want, and not as convenient for you, that you shouldn't get any benefits at all? It seems to me to be very, very simple. Well, here's a job. Here's hello Benjamin, you've lost your job. Here's a job. Well, it's not, it's not sitting in a studio talking. It's not writing. I'm afraid it's, it's digging up the road, or it's working as a washer upper in a restaurant. Well, that if you can't find another job that you want, that's the job you're going to have to take, because I don't see why I should pay for you not to work.
Yeah, I mean, Ronald Reagan said the best form of social welfare is a job. and clearly he has a point. You know, that saying lives on. I do think that the government understands that, though, because the public accounts are so severe that there is no choice. You cannot let this grow. And
except that Labour politicians will be really wary of upsetting their base even more than they've already done.
When we talk about will there be a big Labour backlash, I don't think there will, because, you know, the set of MPs, I know a great many of the new Labour MPs, they're quite young, they're very, in layman's terms, Blairite.
Most of them didn't expect to get elected.
Indeed. 6 months earlier, they didn't expect to be selected in many cases. They're a very agreeable bunch of people. They're very much on Keir Starmer's side. And
they're ambitious.
I don't think they're going to be causing problems, not when they know they've got 4 years of ministerial opportunities.
There is also the point that, you know, there's 400 of them, and basically, you know, you need an awful lot for there to be a rebellion to that serve any purpose. So you're kind of rebelling for the sake of it. But you can put out a tweet and make yourself look like you care.
And it's no surprise Diane Abbott is opposed to it, but I'm not sure her maths was ever so good.
No, as a general rule, if Diane Abbott's opposed to something, I support it.
Can I make one other point, which is this saves £5 billion if they succeed. But the triple lock on pensions had £11 billion this year, and that no party is pledging to deal with.
No.
Now, there are many pensioners, about 25%, who are worth more than £1 million. I don't dispute they worked hard for that. But when you're looking at public finances, can we afford to spend more on pensions than defence, education,
and especially young people, you know, again, the generational divide there is an issue. However, also, our state pension is one of the lowest in the Western world.
Except that we've structured it slightly different to other countries, so the difference between private pension and state pension slightly distorts that figure. But 11 billion quid extra goes on the pension costs this year because of the triple lock. Yeah. And the generation in Britain that's benefited most in the last 10 years is people that are retired. Now, I don't resent
they managed to buy a home. They didn't have to pay for uni fees. They managed to buy a home for a pittance, which is now worth a lot.
Precisely, and you just...
my parents' generation, I mean, they've cleaned up.
A serious government that was being honest about what's unsustainable would confront that.
That would be interesting.
But I don't think it's likely to happen.
Can we just mention also the 20,000 civil service credit cards that have been frozen, spending crackdown. Basically, been spending a load of money on stuff they shouldn't have been spending on, and basically everyone's going to have it taken away, and you have to reapply and justify why you need it. I can understand some civil servants working abroad would need that. I have to say, the cheek of some of these people, some of the things they've been spending money on. I want to know, though, is anyone going to be sacked for their dodgy expenses? Because you get sacked anywhere else for dodgy expenses.
Yes, indeed. And I mean,
it's our money.
There was a story in the Daily Express about sort of 40 mobile phones being lost and replaced in one department every day.
I've never lost a mobile phone.
No.
I've literally never lost a mobile phone.
No, I've smashed a fair few, but I've never lost them, right? You know, you drop them, but I don't lose them. And so, you know, you wonder whether there is a lax culture that they just know these costs will be covered.
Wonder. I know.
Yes.
I absolutely know. I also want to talk about, I mean, what's going on internationally, Ukraine and Gaza. Also, just finally, those two astronauts, finally, from the International Space Station, are returning to Earth after 9 months. They've been on the International Space Station all that time. 10 o'clock tonight, UK time, they will be touching down. This, of course, is Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. They left for the International Space Station on 5th of June last year. Now, they're supposed to be there 8 days. There's been so much talk about how they've been stranded there. This is such an utter media lie. They haven't been stranded there. There was another, you know, a rocket went up and brought other people, and there were 2 spaces, and they were allowed to come back if they wanted. But they stayed for a 6-month project. They stayed to do that project. So Elon Musk and Donald Trump saying, oh, you know, Biden wouldn't go and rescue them, and they turned down. But you're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds to bring back 2 astronauts early, when they were perfectly happy to stay in space and carry on the project.
Well, I hadn't realised that. I thought they simply couldn't work out how to get up there in time.
Absolutely no. And they've got an escape capsule there. If they needed to come back at any time, they could have done that. This has just been turned into this sort of media circus.
I tell you what, I mean, former astronauts make a lot of money. These 2 are a lot more famous than they ever could have dreamed. So I suspect the rest of their lives will be more interesting for it.
Absolutely. We're going to talk to our space boffin. I love our space boffin, Andy Lound, about all that later on. Lots more coming up. I want to hear from you. You always call in about anything we're talking about. I know a lot of you want to call in about Nigel Farage, that interview we just had. Also, Kemi Badenoch talking about the net zero. Lots of you being in touch all this week and last week about benefit reform. Do you think it's whatever's going to be announced is going to be enough stick, or is it going to be too much carrot? Is it going to go far enough? I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
and obviously to promote Shakespeare, to preserve properties where tourists would come who are presumably interested in Shakespeare and perhaps might even appreciate Shakespeare. And therefore, this is another example of an organization that has been tempted into undermining its own purpose. I mean, they're actually staging Bollywood dance workshops.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benjamin Butterworth is here. Great to have you back. I love it. I love a good rant. I mean, obviously wrong about everything, but, you know, but not really. Still it's part of the fun. Coming up, we are going to be talking a little bit more about what's going on in Gaza. There's Israeli airstrikes. Also, well, having an annual weigh-in at the GP, it might help tackle obesity. Will it? I find one of the biggest problems that GPs don't actually say, mate, you're fat, you need to lose weight. People are in denial, are they not? But is anyone's business? People choose to eat what they want, to be the weight they want. Anyway, we'll talk about that. First up, let's get to your phone calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Del is on the line in Leicestershire. And Del, you want to talk about my conversation with Nigel Farage?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Well, thanks for calling.
It's very kind of you. I admire you for years, but pleasure speaking to you now. In regards to what Mr. Farage says in regards to Ben Habib, in regards to how he has not achieved certain things while he was deputy leader.
Can I just recap for people who weren't listening an hour ago? Basically, Nigel Farage was saying, Ben Habib has criticised Nigel Farage, saying he can't lead the party, he's not going to achieve, he damaged the country. And he said, look, this is a man who's, when he was deputy leader, didn't, field enough candidates, didn't win anything, and basically saying Ben Habib doesn't actually, have the practical ability to match his words.
Indeed. But surely Richard Trice was the leader then, wasn't he?
Yes.
With Ben Habib.
Yeah.
So one would argue that the same thing should apply to Richard Trice.
I don't know whether Ben Habib's job at that time, genuinely don't know, was to field those candidates and sort that. I don't know.
Because it was Richard Trice and Ben Habib who took the party, I think, with 13%.
Yeah.
Before Nigel Farage came on board. And it wasn't until when the polls were showing rather positive signs that Monsieur Farage came back on board.
Well, to be fair, he was always on board. He already kind of owns the party. But
when he said that he had nothing to do with it when he was presenting his television program, that was not true then, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. So in regards to doing that, but in regards to Mr. Lair, he has only said that he wants to deport illegal immigrants.
That's actually not what Ripple he's talked about, the people who knew about the Pakistani grooming gangs who failed to act, whole communities and their families.
Those with dual nationality.
Yeah, but people who've not been convicted of crimes. Dual nationality legally here with British-born children. He was talking about deporting whole communities.
I'm quite sure that is not what he said, but I'm prepared to be corrected on that, and I will go and review all his tweets and his interviews he's given on the matter. But I'm quite sure that he doesn't intend it to be all communities.
Well, you think people who knew what was going on and knew the crimes?
Yes, he did. Indeed, he did say that. That's absolutely correct. But Julia, as an admirer of yours, in many ways, I really think you are in for a big surprise when it comes closer to the general election in regards to Mr. Farage.
Yeah.
Because I think, I know you will be honest enough to come back and apologize for taking him at his word that he really wants to be Prime Minister and will do his best to do so. I think the gentleman you have there, Butterworth, is it?
Yes, Benjamin Butterworth, yeah.
I don't share his politics at all. But I think he was spot on when he spoke of all the other organization Mr. Farage was involved with and not being able to get along with people and people of ability, etc. But I think at the end of the day, we're all in for a big surprise. Now,
when you say big surprise, you mean that Nigel Farage? Well, I mean, I'm not taking him at his word in terms of I'm not saying I think that he'd win or whether he'd be a good prime minister or not. I ask the questions.
Yes, of course.
What's the big surprise we're in for? Just finally.
The big surprise we're in for is that he will eventually do a deal with the Tories.
Oh, right. He says he won't, but you think he will?
Oh, no. He will. He will. Especially if they offer him a lordship and he could go to the Lords as an independent.
He really, I can't tell you how much I know for a fact he doesn't care about stuff like that.
Okay. Well, we will beg to differ on that. I know differently, but we will beg to differ.
No, that's interesting. No, again, I still think a deal is a possibility, but I don't think he can be bought for a period. I mean, who would want to sit in the House of Lords, for goodness sake? But look, I'm going to have to leave there because I want to get to another call before I have to go to a break. But really interesting call, Dale. Call in again. I'm sure I would love to have this conversation again. I know lots of other people would like to take part as well. 0344 499 1000. What do you make of what Dale had to say? Thank you for that. Let's go to Alan, who is in Shropshire. Hello, Alan.
Good morning.
Good morning. Julia. You sound very chirpy. What do you want to say?
Well, this is about the first day I've actually seen the sun. You know, when that chap who's on there with you now, he always said it's getting hotter every year.
I wish.
Good grief, because I kind of work outside, been 65 days, well, apart from Christmas. And last year I had never even got a suntan.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all in favour of global warming.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is, Julia, I don't know whether you've noticed, but you have a look at all these climate figures. They're all totally inflated because, I mean, as far as the dairy cows are concerned, I mean, they say that a cow gives off 5,000 litres of methane a day.
Yeah.
I mean, a cow only gives up to 50 litres of milk a day. I mean, if they produce that much methane, I mean, you wouldn't keep them for milk. I mean, you'd keep them for gas.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Oh, hilarious. Thank you, Alan, in Shropshire. I'm not going to give you a comeback on that, Benjamin, because I feel we're going to go down a rabbit hole. 11:31 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk about what's going on in Israel, what's going on in Gaza, and, of course, also, where do we see things going in Ukraine? We're going to talk about that later. And tackling obesity. Would an annual weigh-in at the GP help you tackle your waistline? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up a little bit later, we are going to be talking more about the Israel-Hamas war. We're also going to be talking about how to tackle obesity. Would an annual checkup at the GP where you had to be weighed make it easier to tackle obesity? Would that make any difference? We'll talk about all of that, plenty more besides. Right now, I'm delighted to welcome to the show Seb Gorka, Deputy Assistant to the United States President Donald Trump and Senior Director for Counterterrorism in the White House. A very, very good morning to you, Seb.
Good morning, Julia. It's been far too long. Good to be back.
It absolutely has. Well, congratulations on your grand new post and grand new title, working in the Trump administration. It is great to be joined by you. I suppose the first thing I want to talk to you about today, crucially, is that this phone call that's going to take place for a couple of hours this afternoon, we understand, between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. What do you expect is going to be decided today?
Well, I think if you look at the last 3 years, if you look at the state of the economy for Russia, if you look at the reality of the war, as my boss, the National Security Advisor, former Green Beret Mike Waltz, very accurately called it at that negotiating table in Saudi Arabia, it is a meat grinder for both sides. It is a tragedy. I think we've arrived at that moment where both sides need it to end, and there's only one person who can broker that deal, and it's President Trump. So I think it's going to be I'm not going to talk for the president. I'm not going to say anything more about that phone call. I think it's just going to be a reality check for the Kremlin.
A reality check for the Kremlin, and yet one of the concerns people like me have is that Donald Trump has basically given away all of his negotiating positions. The art of the deal is supposed to be, his big skill, but he's given away all the negotiations. Things like, no, it's okay, Ukraine will never get NATO membership, going to have to cede territory. They'll lose military aid if they don't agree to a ceasefire. He's basically given every single negotiating position that the US has, hasn't he?
Not in the slightest. This is, the narrative from the fake news industrial complex. President Trump, as he promised, what was it, yesterday, or was it Friday? He talked about everything else we can do with regards to sanctions on Russia that hasn't even begun to feel the pinch. There are certain things that I, again, am not going to reveal that the president has up his sleeve that he can do. And I find the alternative a little bit absurd. So what are those who are saying President Trump has given it all away? What is the alternative they're talking about? When is two-para going to land in Moscow? I think the reality check probably applies to lots of our European.
That's no way. I mean, hey, I massively appreciate the reality check that Donald Trump has given to European nations about their need to basically get their own defences and their defence spending in order. I agree with Donald Trump back in his first term in office when he called out the Europeans on that. I think you've done Europe a favour on that front. I'm not entirely sure why a taxpayer in Arizona should be funding the defence of France, Poland, or me, with all due respect to those people. But here's the key thing: there isn't a choice between, well, let's have a ceasefire, let's have peace at any cost and a deal at any cost, and US troops marching on Moscow. That's not the choice. But there is a clear and easy option, which is US military being there to back Ukraine, to guarantee Ukraine's borders in the future. Let's just say, right, give up Crimea to Russia, even the Donbass regions, but to maintain the territorial integrity of Ukraine from that point on, the US European military backing under the NATO umbrella, guarantee Russia not one toe cap further. That would, perfectly well that would deter Russia. Why not do it?
You're talking about NATO membership, and that's out of the question.
Why? Why?
Because you have to read the Atlantic Treaty that founded the alliance in April 1949. It's one of the shortest international treaties in world history. It's only got 14 paragraphs, and it talks about the fact that there are two conditions for NATO membership. Number one, you have to be able to prove that you are a representative democracy. You function as a democracy.
Which it is.
Let me finish, Julia. Be patient, please. And secondly, you have to be able to contribute to the collective defense of the alliance. A war-ravaged nation that has parts of its territory that are not under its control is neither a functioning democracy nor in a position to contribute to the collective defense of the alliance. I'm sorry, unless you shatter the founding document of NATO, this will simply not happen. And the idea that we haven't done enough, can we just have a history lesson on the part of the world that is the Ukraine? When Democrats were in the White House, they literally sent blankets to Kiev. That's what Obama did after the invasion. When we came into the White House the first time, what did my boss, Donald Trump, do? He sent Javelin anti-tank missiles. So if any nation has done the most to make sure that Kiev can repel invaders, it is us.
Yeah,
So,
I accept that.
Let's have a little chat.
That's why the US is so vital in protecting a democracy on the eastern flank of Europe, which was supposed to be an ally of your nation. And yet I fear, and this is the big worry a lot of people have, that Donald Trump is totally and utterly sort of in awe of Vladimir Putin, Mr. Strongman dictator of Russia.
Julia,
and
I
then
like
he is going to give the entire game away.
Garbage like that. I mean, that is utter gutter press.
Why does he call
honestly,
Zelensky a dictator but not Trump? Let me tell you a story about
President Trump and Putin. Let me tell you a story. Everybody is now such an amazing expert on the Wagner Group because of the fake coup that they engineered against Moscow. Let me tell you a little bit about the Wagner Group a few years ago. When we were in the first Trump administration, this is now declassified, I can talk about it, we briefed the president that there are hundreds of Russian soldiers running around the Middle East destabilizing it. The Wagner Group, working for the Kremlin. What did President Trump do? He said, kill them now. 4 hours later, in the Battle of Kasham, 300 Russian soldiers had been turned into red mist. Now, this is important because no American president, not even the great Ronald Reagan, no American president since the October Revolution of 1917 had done such an incredible act of geopolitical messaging, killing hundreds of Russians who were destabilizing a whole region of the world. What did Vladimir Putin do? He didn't even have a press conference. So this is the man who's so enthralled.
Okay, so why doesn't Donald Trump have the same
Putin?
attitude to
Stop
Ukraine?
It,
why doesn't he take the same attitude to Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin has massively destabilized the world economy, the world energy market, the Western democracy? He hasn't.
Julia, name me one other head of state, anyone, just anyone in the world who has the capacity to make the phone call today and to bring a deal to the table. Name me one. I'll wait.
He's the most powerful man in the world. And that's why it's very important that he acts in defense of Western democracies and not to aid a murderous dictator who has invaded a democratic state.
How is stopping the conflict aiding a dictator? How is stopping? Stop. Do you want more Ukrainians to die today, Julia?
No, but Vladimir Putin does.
See, you go very quickly from the no but. Do you want the fighting to stop right now?
Would I have liked the fighting to stop in 1940 in Europe? Yes, I would as well. But it's at what cost? That's the crucial matter, Seb Corker. It's at what cost? The alternative is a security guarantee. That even if we stop the war, and even if Ukraine lost the territory they've already lost to Russia, even if, the security guarantee, okay, not under the NATO umbrella. America can offer a security guarantee with a coalition of the willing, France, Germany, and others, and Britain and others, and they could deter a further assault from Vladimir Putin on not just Ukraine but other countries.
You know what really deters an assault? I mean, this is why people don't get it at all. This is why. They just fall for the nostrums and the stupid, cliched, boilerplate garbage. You know what really secures Ukraine?
What?
A minerals deal, which allows hundreds and thousands of Americans to work in that land. I mean,
hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Oh, Julia, let me stop. Just stop it for a second and let your guests talk, okay? Don't be the BBC, okay?
That was insulting. You went for a low blow there, Seb.
But it's like I said to the BBC last week when they cut my mic off. The greatest security for any nation is economic relations with the United States and our citizens working on your territory. What is a piece of paper? What is a signed document worth? It's Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich with peace in our time, as opposed to thousands of Americans on the soil of the Ukraine working together with Ukrainians. That is the ultimate guarantee. That would put a stay to anybody thinking of invading any country. That's the real art of the deal. And I wish members of the media would finally understand it, but they're inbuilt. Look, Julia,
I understand it. I just don't believe it.
I love you dearly, but you still suffer from Trump derangement syndrome.
No, I don't. I've been very. But this is no, but this is the absolute nonsense from your side, which is that I've been. I said, look, given a choice, I'd have voted for him this time round. I support him. I support him on all the Doge efforts massively. Support him on the immigration issue, support him on net zero, support him on the woke stuff, support him on all of that stuff. I've been cheering him on. When I criticise, and on Israel, and we'll come on to Israel, when I criticise him on a one policy which I expressed concerns about before he was elected, and I had hoped that he would be stronger on this, I've been very disappointed. I thought his treatment of Zelensky in the Oval Office was genuinely appalling and shocking and beneath the dignity of the office of the United States President.
That's your problem.
That's not derangement syndrome. That's fair criticism.
That's where you reveal yourself, Julia. That's where you reveal yourself.
Well, I don't think he should humiliate a war leader.
Incredibly magnanimous for 30 minutes, and then Zelensky had lectured the president in the Oval Office.
Pointed out some facts.
Vice President Pence was Vice President J.D. Vance was absolutely right in calling him out. The idea that you think that was a problem because of how the American side behaved.
Yes.
When he had it in his grasp, he had peace within inches.
There was no, there wasn't. It was a minerals deal. That was all that was on offer at that time.
Which is exactly the point I just made.
Yeah, but that's
exactly the point I just made.
I don't think that he thinks, and I don't think that actually that is going to bring peace in Ukraine. The key thing here, the point at which Donald Trump got annoyed and started being very angry with Zelensky was the point at which Zelensky pointed out that a piece of paper signed by Vladimir Putin for a ceasefire wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. I'm paraphrasing, because he'd reneged on every single agreement of Ukraine previously. He was pointing out he was pointing out that he wasn't trustworthy. No, I'm not asking us to trust Putin. I'm asking America, as the greatest military and economic power in the world, and your boss, the most powerful man in the world, to say to Vladimir Putin, you don't get to invade Western democracies and not face punishment, and we will stop you. That's what I'm asking.
How did the Western piece of paper sign in Budapest in 1999?
Well, exactly. Well, America reneged on that, didn't they? They didn't do anything.
Not this president. So why do you think another one is going to fix it, Julia?
I think another one. I just like the one that we've got to fix it. Here's the thing. Let's go on to Israel, because I love Donald Trump's position on Israel. He's very, very clear. Who are the goodies and who are the baddies? The democratic nation state or the violent, genocidal terrorists? Okay. I never understand why he doesn't understand the same situation in Ukraine. But let's come to Israel. What do you make of the airstrike?
How is it the same situation? How is a bunch of jihadi terrorists the same as a nation with 11 time zones and 4,000 nuclear weapons?
In terms of the morality
of
their
your ignorance of national security.
I'm not ignorant. I'm talking about the basic morality of the situation. I think is more similar than it is different. Let's talk about...
Geopolitics are utterly different. Utterly different. You have terrorists and you have a nuclear nation.
Yeah.
How is that similar?
I think the point is, whose side should we be on?
Oh, we know whose side President Trump is on, but carry on.
Do we? That's my point. Julia,
this is a man who's dedicated to ending the bloodshed, and you don't care.
At what cost?
You just really don't care. At
what cost? Would he have done a deal with Hitler to end the bloodshed? At what cost?
The fact is, he is stopping the bloodshed.
At what cost?
To what cost?
Yes. Would he stop the bloodshed? If China invades Taiwan, at what cost would he stop the bloodshed? You can always stop the bloodshed. If you put your hands up and say, don't shoot, here's my white flag, you can stop the bloodshed. At what cost?
So you are saying that NATO is now going to guarantee... You live in an alternate universe. This is a country with occupied territory. NATO can't vouchsafe a nation whose territory is occupied. If you want to unoccupy it, it's going to have to be two para. Two para is going to deploy to Donbass, Julia,
I said you can take it out. We've gone through this. You can take it out of the NATO umbrella. You can just make it a coalition of the willing, including the United States. But we've gone through it. Can we talk about Israel, please? Because we haven't got much time, and I'm sure you've got a job to get on with as well. Israel, when it comes to Israel, the airstrikes we've seen from the Israeli forces on Gaza, again, typical reporting today is all about the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health saying that some 400 plus people have died, many innocents, we're told. But we also know the target was 10 Hamas leadership figures and their henchmen, no doubt. Numerous of them surrounding the men the 10 who were killed in that attack. What do you make of Britain? Foreign Secretary David Lammy saying that the acts by Israel, in particular in withdrawing aid and refusing to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza in recent weeks, is actually illegal and breaking international law.
Yeah, I find it strange when journalists think an employee of the White House is going to qualify comments made by an allied nation's cabinet member. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it.
Do you think he's right or wrong?
I think those words speak for themselves, as does Lammy's track record before he took that position. So, Israel has done more than any other nation to make sure the people of that benighted territory actually have food and water to survive. So I'm really not going to qualify those comments.
OK, just finally, been criticism of Donald Trump for basically sort of starting a world tariff war with many of his key allies, particularly Canada, Europe and others. Does he look forward at some point to meeting the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney?
Oh, absolutely. If you've ever been in a room with the president when he's receiving guests, he's one of the most gracious hosts I've ever seen in my 54 years on this planet. But the fact is, when you are putting tariffs of beyond 200% on US dairy goods into Canada, we will not allow that to continue.
Do you think this tariff war is going to end, as many predicting, in an economic world recession, or do you think that other countries will give in and we'll end up with more free trade?
Well, I know what happened the first time round. America became the biggest economy the world had ever seen, and our relations with other nations suddenly got better when they realized that fair trade is as important as free trade. OK, we'll have to leave it there. Time is against us. Seb Gorka, absolute pleasure to have you join us. Do come back again. Deputy Assistant to the US President Donald Trump and Senior Director for Counter-Terrorism. Going to get Benjamin Butterworth's reaction to that interview. Quite feisty, always gets feisty with Seb Gorka. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
Go slightly further, I think, Kevin. I would say that anyone who entered the country illegally should not be allowed to apply for asylum. they should be detained, and then they should be deported. There should be no room for decriminalising the criminal activity of crossing our borders without our permission. It's as simple as that. And the notion that, I mean, the Labour Party don't even call them illegal migrants, they call them irregular migrants.
If only they were, Ben, they're very, very regular.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. We're going to get a very quick word from Benjamin Butterworth on my conversation with our last guest, Seb Gorka, who works obviously for Donald Trump. He's been a guest on the show over many years, back working for the president in his second term. But Benjamin Butterworth, just a brief word about that.
I think we should be alarmed. As far as I'm concerned, the only person with Trump derangement syndrome is the ones who don't think there's something extremely peculiar, if not dangerous, about the attitude to Russia. We know that when he stood for president, he said, I want a peace deal in 100 days. That is not a great negotiating strategy.
You never put a deadline on it. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Well, again, you got to remember he's going to deal with those things in one day, wasn't it? Peace deal in one day. Right, let's talk about something completely different now. Let's talk about obesity. Now, would being summoned for an annual weigh-in at your local GP surgery under new NHS guidelines help to tackle obesity? Let's talk to Jane Deville-Armand. She's the chair of the British Obesity Society and an independent nurse consultant. Very good morning to you, Jane.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. So we haven't got much time because our conversation with the White House went on a little bit longer than we expected. My first thought when I saw this was difficult enough to get an appointment at the GP, let alone be allowed into the actual building. How on earth would GPs have enough appointments to bring all these people in to check their weight?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is just another one of the government kind of, attempts at like bringing down obesity in the country. And I mean, obviously, you've just made it. You just said the obvious. I mean, you can't even get an appointment if you're sick. So getting 50 million people into the surgery, have their waist done and their height done and their...
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we're told, if you've got common conditions like arthritis, heart failure, diabetes, I mean, again, a lot of people who've got very high BMI, and I know BMI is not the perfect measurement, but we all know if someone's fat or they're not fat. It's not complicated. Those people will often have a lot of other health complaints anyway. Aren't doctors already weighing them?
Exactly. I mean, anybody who goes to the doctors, the majority of GPs will have weighed the patient when they get there. And, there's all this, we people are scared of offending anybody, It's just part of a medical assessment. I mean, people have to remember that we're not bothered about how they look. We're not bothered about how it looks aesthetically. Yeah. What we're interested in is the impact that their weight is having on their health.
But again, exactly, if you've got diabetes, if you've got a heart condition, you've got high cholesterol often, although I know people very, very skinny who've got high cholesterol. If you've got, knee joints problems, you've got, hip problems. As a general rule, these will be related to your weight.
Exactly, and that's the issue. I mean, it's very hard to explain to someone that if you're carrying 2 or 3 times the amount of weight your body's built to carry, then it's going to impact on your health.
Ta-da!
And people don't like to hear it. They don't like to listen to it.
A lot of people are in denial, though, aren't they? I've got a very good very close family member who's utter denial about whether or not he is overweight or how overweight he is, and it's almost laughable. It's sort of, how do you not realise that? I mean, there's some simple ways of, measuring, there's your waistline as a ratio of your height, obviously, which is perhaps a better giveaway of healthy weight than BMI. But BMI is accurate-ish enough for most people, not top athletes or boxers who've got great muscle mass, but for the average person, it's not a bad indicator.
But Julia, also, we need to use our eyes. I mean, you're absolutely correct. I mean, as a nurse, I don't need to do all these measurements. When someone walks into my clinic, I know whether they're, overweight or obese or not. I mean, it's, there are some areas of people's weight where it's not as obvious. Like sometimes people have a higher waist ratio with fat around the middle, and it's not as obvious as when someone is morbidly obese. But
But that can still be dangerous. And what's the best way of dealing with it? Because, I mean, again, we don't want people, mocking people, abusing people, shouting fatty people. But isn't there an element where we need to have a little bit of a wake-up call about
I think the wake-up I think the wake-up call will be when we haven't got an NHS and people are sick and they've got no one to help them. I think the wake-up call is that if people don't look after their bodies and they become sick, in the future, who knows who's going to be there to help us? We already know there's waiting times for operations, there's waiting times to go and see a doctor. You know, the only people who can look after your health is you. I'm afraid that is what it comes down to.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're all going to live longer unless, I mean, the reality is, okay, people who are very overweight may end up living a short life, but they're going to live more years in ill health. Well, I don't know why people don't want to live as long as possible in good health. It seems to me to be such a simple and obvious aim. Jane Deville-Almond, thank you so much for joining us. She's the chair of the British Obesity Society. Benjamin Butterworth, you're a healthy figure of a man. Breathing in. But, you know, I mean, none of us is, you know, I'm probably twice your age, but you have to work at it. I had my chicken and broccoli for dinner last night. I dreamt of a kebab, dreamt of it. But the reality is, I mean, do you think that we just need to be, everyone needs to be a little bit more honest with themselves, but doctors need to be more honest as well?
Well, there's been a normalisation of being overweight, and so I don't think people feel the social pressure that they did. Yeah. And if doctors aren't going to be straight with them, you know, look at the COVID pandemic we just had. After age, weight was the biggest indicator of whether somebody would get seriously ill or die. Now, if that shock isn't going to wake the country up, then I don't know what
When
will.
I see very overweight people on the tube on the way home, which I see virtually every day with a mask on, because, you know, COVID, I literally, I laugh in their faces, like, are you serious? You're so concerned about, you know, about COVID, but eating yourself into oblivion. It is mind-blowing, it really is, isn't it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and all the topics we're talking about. Up next, going to talk to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Quite a lot to talk to him about. United the Right, anybody? That's all coming up. This is Talk. We are, of course, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Goodness me, it's been a lively one today, has it not? Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or connected to us, always great to hear from you on any of the topics we are talking about. Always a lively one with Seb Gorka, now working back with Donald Trump in the White House. And Fascinated to see what comes of that conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin this afternoon. Fascinated also to see what we're going to get in terms of those benefit reforms to be announced by Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary. I think she's going to stand up in the House in roughly half an hour's time. We do already know, though, what Kemi Badenoch is having to say today. The Tory leader has warned that the government's target of hitting net zero emissions by 2050 is a fantasy, unachievable, impossible, and will end up bankrupting us. Which is really funny because nothing's changed since she supported that policy when she was in power. We're also going to be talking more about, Ukraine, and we're going to talk about the two astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, stuck in space for more than 9 months. They've left the International Space Station early hours this morning on a 17-hour journey back to Earth due to splash back down to Earth just before 10 o'clock tonight UK time. We'll talk about all of that coming up. Still with me is Benjamin Butterworth, journalist and broadcaster. And we're covering a lot of ground today. Yes. We really are covering an awful lot of ground. Not quite as much as the astronauts heading back to Earth. But some breaking news just from Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. He's told Donald Trump that Ukraine must be put in the strongest possible position in order to secure a just and lasting peace. This is ahead of that phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, scheduled for about 3 o'clock UK time today. And this is following a call between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump on Monday night. There's no doubt at all, European leaders in particular and other sort of coalition of the willing feeling folk, Australians, Canadians and others, are very anxious that Donald Trump is going to give away the farm to Vladimir Putin when it comes to this deal on Ukraine. And it does matter, not just the people of Ukraine, it matters massively for European security. Are you concerned about what Donald Trump could offer Vladimir Putin, given he's already talked about how they've already carved up quite a lot of the deal?
Exactly. I mean, I think Sir Ian Duncan Smith put it well when it's like, the 19th century carving up the world as though these aren't countries with their own rights and peoples and freedoms. And I think Donald Trump isn't a listener. I don't think he listens to Keir Starmer. I don't think he listens to other people. I think he goes through the motions. But there's something about Vladimir Putin that taps into his psyche. I don't know whether it's because he admires that strongman style of leadership, the fact that he's so rich, the fact that he can do what he likes. Is that what Donald Trump wishes to do?
Well, there has been some talk, I think it's just language about wanting to be a dictator.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that was talk, and that was blown up by the Democrats.
Or is there something that Russia has on Trump? That is a lingering question, because it's very peculiar.
The compromat.
Exactly, because it's very peculiar, this behaviour. And the truth is, it's extremely dangerous. If he doesn't want to support a security backstop in Ukraine, if he doesn't want to support Ukraine in the long term, he just wants to get these minerals. Yeah. And they talk about $500 million worth, I think, or $500 billion. That was
the first talk.
I don't think that exists in the
but
first
also
place.
most of the mineral deposits that do exist are currently in the Donbass region, which is held by the Russians. So whether they're carving that up, the idea. At one point, Seb Gorka talked about having hundreds of thousands of Americans working there. I mean, that's just pie in the sky nonsense. And then he said it went down to thousands. The idea that would stop Russian boots marching through Ukraine, I think frankly is risible. I genuinely do worry about what's going to happen. But again, it is extraordinary. Britain and America and Russia all agreed to basically to guarantee, long before the invasion of Crimea, to guarantee that Ukraine's border and territorial integrity. We have a duty of care to the country. We persuaded them to give back, give those nuclear weapons back to Russia. We'll protect your territorial integrity, and we've not done that. We didn't do it after Crimea was invaded. I think no one seems to think that they're going to get Ukraine back. Ukraine's going to get Crimea back. Maybe even the Donbass region is lost. It seems to me to be bare minimum that the West, doesn't have to be NATO, could be a coalition of the willing, would guarantee Ukraine's at least existing de facto borders. And if we're not even willing to do that, that message is going very, very clearly to Vladimir Putin, and he is laughing. He will wind Donald Trump round his little finger. Donald Trump, I know a lot of people say I've got Trump change, but I haven't. Donald Trump is a perfectly clever man. He's done pretty well. He was a little rich kid who got money from his dad. I know he's started a load of businesses. There's lots of things he does that aren't clever. There's a lot of stuff. He spouts nonsense a lot of the time. He just spouts things that just simply aren't true all of the time. Now, he either just doesn't know things, or he spouts what the last thing he's read on social media has said. But Vladimir Putin is very, very, very clever and cunning and wily. You don't survive that long as a dictator in Russia unless you are. And I think he's going to run rings around Trump.
I think he will. And you know, we know that Putin doesn't stick to agreements even when they're come to. He just looks plans for the next stage.
That's why no policy should be based on trust in Putin, as Zelensky was trying to say when he was talked down. And it should be based on, you make it clear that the penalty for breaking that deal is going to cost you and your country so much it's not worth doing it. And that's why you need American and coalition boots on the ground. And that's simple. That's the end of it.
And the minerals deal suggested would put a greater strain on Ukraine than we even put on Germany after the Second World War. It is completely unjust.
I want all of the money in the European banks from Russia. Hand it over.
I agree with
for
that.
the
And so does Rishi Sunak and Rachel Reeves by the looks of it. But we know that this is sending a message to the rest of the world. China has been cutting underwater cables to Taiwan to cut off the internet, maybe in preparation for what they want to do there. And so we will have far more war, not far more peace, if this is what happens.
Speak softly, carry a big stick, rather than shout loudly. And then just go, have whatever you want. But anyway, that's what we think. You can tell me I've got Trump derangement syndrome as much as you want, but I know I'm in the right on this one, morally and factually. More from Benjamin Butterworth coming up right now. I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Littlewood. He's Director of Popular Conservatism and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Mark.
Hi, Julia. Good to be with you.
Let's turn our attention to matters back at home. But of course, they have international implications in terms of our ability to afford to defend ourselves and run our country and afford things like energy. Let's talk first of all about what we do know today, which is what Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, has had to say about net zero policy. She's basically saying that all the policy that she's been supporting for the last few years and the Tories put into actual acts of parliament in terms of the net zero by 2050 targets is a fantasy. It's impossible. It would bankrupt the nation. Now, I know that. You know that. It's been known and obvious for anyone who looked at the most basic figures and stats on this for a number of years. When did Kemi Badenoch find out?
Well, you're right. It's a shift in the Conservative position, a dramatic shift, even a U-turn from the position of the last government. Kemi does point out, fairly enough, that she was one of, I think, only 2 MPs who raised concerns about this on the floor of the House of Commons.
I think 2015, but yeah.
Yeah, then you get the position that if you served in the last Conservative government, what do we expect of you? Should you have resigned on any matter that was outside of your portfolio because you disagreed, or do you try and focus on your portfolio and say, well, there's a whole load of other stuff going on, not all of which I approve of, which I think is going to go awry, but I can't fight every battle at once. Yeah. She decided to stay in the tent. She's reached the conclusion, I don't know when, I think she was a sceptic about carbon net zero all along, but she's now a public sceptic. Yeah. And I think this is being a pretty big step in the right direction.
And I can understand that. And again, she did some really good things in office. She was trying to sort of push the government on something, the trans issue and things like that. She's been, I think, a voice of largely sanity on a lot of issues like immigration. However, she was very quiet when it came to lockdown. She was very quiet on net zero. On 2 of the biggest issues that massively affect our economy, the future of our country, civil liberties, because net zero ain't being achieved without massive impact on our civil liberties. She's been mysteriously quiet. And it was even during her Tory leadership bid, she, like the other final front runner, Robert Jenrick, didn't talk about getting rid of net zero. He, halfway through the campaign, suddenly decided to say he was against net zero, claiming, when I tackled him on this, Robert Jenrick, that it was me that had persuaded him, which I think is, let's face it, we'll agree, a load of nonsense on that. Even when she was able to speak her own mind, she wasn't saying it. Hasn't she just looked at the polling and realised that the British people are not fooled by this nonsense anymore? It's unaffordable, it's unachievable, and it's better to ditch it now. But she's done that for political reasons rather than because it's the right thing to do?
Well, Julia, also, you should take more credit where credit's due. Come on, you and I should be punching the air that we're dragging Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, so I guess politicians always have to have a mind between, what do they firmly believe in and what can they sell to win an election. There's obviously that is a feature and a factor. But I think it would be completely unfair to say that Kemi Badenoch had ever been some sort of net zero zealot. This isn't like Ed Miliband changing his mind. I think she was...
but isn't it better that someone who genuinely believes this madness, I mean, they have to be utterly deluded, but we know Ed Miliband is, but at least if someone utterly believes it, I can almost forgive them. But if you don't believe it, and you know it's nonsense, you can do the maths, you know it's nonsense, shouldn't you speak out on it when it has such a huge impact on our ability to deal with the threat from Russia, the threat from, on all other fronts, our ability to pay our bills, our freedom to manoeuvre on every issue. I mean, the possibility of us having blackouts because we haven't got enough energy. Is there not a duty of a serious politician to speak out?
In that case, Julia, essentially the criticism is that Kemi Badenoch should have said what she said this morning a year ago. Maybe that is a criticism, but thank God she's now said it.
We'll take the hit. We'll take it. OK.
A big step in the right direction.
Do you think it's going to be a big issue in the next election? Do you think this is going to be a key dividing line between the left and the right?
Definitely. And the reason for that is the rubber is hitting the road on this policy now. When it was initially passed, wouldn't it be marvellous if we got to carbon net zero? And surely there's a technological way of doing it that won't cost us a bean. But now we're seeing all the catastrophes of heat pumps, cars being phased out, suggestions that, we're going to have to cut our meat consumption. I don't think this is going to go down very well with the British electorate. So in concept, of course, everybody wants to save the environment. But when you actually start looking at the cost of this for a minimal rate of return, I mean, look, if I could click my fingers now and for no cost get Britain to carbon net zero immediately, I'd do it. But it wouldn't have any impact on climate change because we're only 1% of the emissions anyway. So I think it's becoming real in people's wallets, in people's homes, in the bills that are hitting their doormats. So likely to be a major defining issue.
Yeah, I'm just pleased. One of the major parties, and again, not that Reform isn't a major party now, is actually taking this seriously. I think this is one of those house of cards that's going to collapse very, very quickly. And we saw with Donald Trump, that was a key factor in his election as well. Let's talk about the speech that's going to be made. We understand in the House of Commons, hopefully in the next 15 minutes or so, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall's going to announce these long-awaited, long-briefed and unbriefed and rebriefed again changes to welfare benefits, in particular disability and sickness benefits. 1 in 10 working-age people in this country claiming some sort of sickness benefit. Millions and millions of people economically inactive and not in training, not doing anything. 1 million young people not doing anything of any use to anybody, and we're paying for them. Are there reforms such as we know that they are, the £5 billion in savings in terms of making it harder to get onto personal independence payments for long-term disability, largely for people with mental health problems as they've been lately? Is that going far enough?
Nowhere near far enough, Julia. I mean, the welfare bill in Britain now, including pensions, comes in at, I think, about £14,000 per household per year. It's absolutely unbelievable. Easily the biggest item in the government's ledger. But perhaps we should be grateful for small mercies. I mean, this is a step in the right direction. We now know that the number of people who are claiming illnesses almost of any type in order to claim welfare doesn't match up with the health data that the NHS have, right? We haven't seen an explosion of people desperately trying to get to the doctor because of problem A, problem B, or problem C. So, it's just the old story of economic incentives, isn't it, Julia? If you pay people to do nothing, more and more people will do nothing. And we haven't...
Hold on a minute. We're told all these people are desperate to work, Mark.
Well, I mean, I doubt that, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, look,
this is the biggest lie, isn't it? We have to give a carrot and a bit of stick because these people are desperate to work, that they need help.
Yeah, the problem that Liz Kendall and the government have got, any politician's got, if you're looking at this rationally, is within this whole group of workless people, there are some very different cohorts. There will be a cohort of people so badly disabled they can never work. There will be a cohort of people who are going through a short or medium-term illness that keeps them at work. There will be a cohort of people who are swinging the lead and trying to get away with it. And what you've got to do, which is no easy task on these discretionary benefits, is to try and divide those cohorts. How can you easily put a person in category A or category B, such that you're making sure that the person who really is seriously disabled, not swinging the lead at all, isn't suddenly cut off? That's quite a challenge, but we're going to have to reduce welfare by enormously more. It's ridiculous. 1 in 8 people between the ages of 18 and 24 are now not in employment or education or training. This is utterly, utterly ludicrous. And we've got to change the incentives. You need to make it more attractive to work. That basically means lowering tax rates. And you need to make it less attractive to be on welfare. All things being equal, that will force more people into the workforce.
Yeah, but not just less attractive, impossible to be on welfare unless you do actually need it. I just think that should, I just think it just shouldn't be not cutting someone's benefits if they don't take a job, down. No benefits. Just very, very simple. You need to take a job. You need to be working. Let me ask you just finally about uniting the right. We talked to Nigel Farage, you Reform UK leader, a little bit earlier about talks with Dominic Cummings, which had been reported at the weekend, and the possibility to unite the right. Now, he says absolutely not. Happy to work with people like Dominic Cummings, but absolutely not talking about any sort of deal of any sort with the Conservatives. Do you think, as one of our callers pointed out that earlier, when we actually get to the point heading towards a general election, say we're in the same situation where actually all the parties are running roughly neck and neck with it. I mean, right now we're looking at 3 parties all around the 25-26% mark, that actually Nigel Farage would be willing to do a deal, and would you welcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to see from Nigel Farage, and indeed from the Conservatives, is a couple of years of sort of shadow boxing, right? Because there isn't likely to be an election anytime soon. So both will be doing everything they can to dial up their poll ratings, to win local council seats, to attract more members. But yeah, imagine a scenario in which we're approaching the 2029 general election. And not just is it sort of looks like if Reform and Conservatives ran everywhere that Labour would get in, possibly on only a quarter of the vote. But let's also imagine, going back to what Kemi Badenoch said earlier this morning, that the Conservatives and Reform have sort of alighted on a similar type manifesto, a similar policy.
Immigration, net zero, benefits.
Let's leave ECHR, let's get rid of carbon net zero, let's get taxes down, let's get rid of a whole swathe of quangos. If the policy platforms start to converge, well, it would be petulant indeed, and not in the national interest for those two parties not to work together. I got what Nigel Farage was saying at the last election. The Conservatives need a damn good kicking, and they've got one. But I suspect by the next election, it will be a total priority, a national emergency even, to remove Labour from office. And I would have thought the electorate would not smile fondly on those who are not willing to put aside partisan differences, were we to get to that situation.
Very interesting. Always good to talk to you, Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Thank you very much indeed for that. Benjamin Butterworth-Stormsby listening in the studio. Mr Woke lefty, you were thrilled with the Labour government. How's that working out for you?
I think the government's fantastic. I really do. I think Keir Starmer's come into his own in the last sort of month or so. And
he's done some good work on the world stage, I'll give him that.
I mean, I was amazed. Last week he said, he was asked, should the state be bigger or smaller? And he said the state should be smaller.
It couldn't get any bigger.
Well, that was his point, actually. That was exactly his point.
I mean, it's not that, that's not rocket science, is it?
But, I think I'm really against these kind of pacts between parties. There were suggestions back in the Brexit years of Lib Dems and Labour doing this, and the Greens. I think it's totally wrong. It's for voters to decide which of the options, and the more options they have, the more accurate their vote can be cast. And so I really don't like the idea, whichever side it falls on, of people in Westminster deciding the choice that you get where you live. I think it's
but people can start their own political party. But at the end of the day, if given the system we have first past the post, if you're in a situation where two parties on the right cancel each other out effectively and allow a party on the left, if voters who are on the right were saying, well, I'd rather have either of you guys in, or, OK, I'd rather have Reform, but I'll take the Tories, or I'd rather have the Tories, I'll take Reform. But we know perfectly well it would end up being Reform that would end up having to give way to the Tories. That think would be what the Tories would be expecting they would do. Also, but would a lot of voters trust that? Would they say, do you know what? We've had Labour light for the last 14 years. We may as well have another Labour government. It's no different. That's what people were saying.
The idea every Reform voter would go to the Tories, I think, is totally wrong. Some of them are former Labour voters. Some of them hate the Tories. They're not going to forgive in one Parliament. So I just don't think it's that simple. Yeah. And I think it would be wrong to do that. And I think that, in truth, I think Keir Starmer's in quite a good position. It will slightly divide the vote. The danger in this in a democracy is that first past the post, which I support, but it almost becomes like luck of the draw. When you've got 4 or 5 parties competing in many constituencies, once we do the Lib Dems and the Greens that are becoming increasingly competitive, the SNP, it starts to be 20% for each, and one gets 10 votes more and it becomes slightly farcical.
Well, that's the majority. I mean, or you can have a situation you've got in Germany and in many other countries in Europe where you have everyone's, PR, proportional representation. It's all very well, but then the party that is on the right, whichever it is, National Rally in France or the AfD in Germany, being frozen out, and the other parties, the equivalents of the Labour and the Tories, come together to freeze out those parties. So they don't get a look in then either.
And all those manifestos become redundant because people in Westminster decide what you get to do and not so much the voters. So I just don't like that system.
Okay, very interesting. Love to hear your thoughts. Get in touch. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Do get in touch on anything we're talking about, including benefit reform, the uniting the right. Kemi Badenoch and her net zero comments today, saying that the net zero target is a fantasy that will bankrupt Britain. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Text on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Don't forget, calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost one standard network rate message. Right now it's 12:22. Let's go for a quick break and then we'll get to your calls up. This is Talk.
One thing we do is talk openly and discuss policy. Anyone who wants to be a member of Reform can be. All views are tolerated. What I will say is we do not stand for racism. Some of the racism you have seen online recently towards our chairman is unacceptable. Nigel Farage was right to call this out. And also some people that have very extreme views that frankly wouldn't have been welcome in any party. But the Reform Party is a professional party preparing for government. That starts with taking over councils in May, winning as many council seats as possible. And no one and nothing will distract the membership of this party.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let me get to some of your messages, texts and tweets. I haven't got to very many of these today about Kemi Badenoch saying that the 2050 net zero target's a fantasy that would bankrupt Britain. Your reaction to that? Roger says, Kemi's right. If Miliband has his way, we'll be bankrupt way before 2050. Well, that's true. Daniel says, wow, she's only suddenly had this brainwave 7 years after becoming an MP. The Tories are doing so badly against a massively unpopular government. Will we have to wait another 7.5 years before her next revelation of common sense? I mean, that's kind of where a lot of people will be coming from. Gail says net zero should have been scrapped years ago. It's an ideological fantasy made up of pseudoscience and carefully manipulated and paid for data. True. Net zero will be the biggest failure and mistake of our time. It's ruining this country. We cannot afford it. And Ken says that yet it was the Tory party that signed the UK up to the Paris Agreement on net zero in 2015. Exactly. Some 9 years of Tory projects and policies funded by the UK taxpayer. The Uni Party, of course, Labour of the Tories, has turned the UK tax system into a GoFundMe account for Westminster MPs and party experiments. Sarah says it's very welcome news after years of Tory net zero gaslighting. Not impressed by how long it's taken. B says, when all our fields are solar, farming is done elsewhere in the world, we will all starve to death when there's another world war. But at least we'll have cheap energy bills. Well, we won't, though. All the UK is doing is causing more pollution elsewhere in the world. Natalie says she's correct, but too late to the party. My vote will go to Reform UK. And this is really interesting. I know, Benjamin Butterworth, I mean, you completely disagree with her on this net zero issue. I mean, I'm glad she's woken up to this. I think she's known all along, but kept quiet. And this is part of the issue. The Conservative Party signing up to a load of sort of Blair-light type policies, which aren't backed up by economics or science or facts of any sort. And she won't, to a certain extent, she's not going to get the credit for changing her mind, because people say, well, but nothing's changed. There's no new information. In which case you must have known already, or you either didn't believe the policy then, or you don't believe your policy now, we can't trust you. And that is the problem that any Conservative leader is facing, who changes major policy planks to try and, well, basically appeal to, people say, you know, the hard right in Reform. I don't think any of the policies that Reform has, or any of the policies that the Tories are moving to, supposedly on the right, are anything other than completely moderate, middle-of-the-road policies. They certainly would have been considered 10 or 20 years ago. Limit immigration, certainly deport illegal immigrants, have energy policy where we've got secure, reliable energy. I mean, this should be basic stuff for any government of the centre-right.
But the problem is all those things are a problem because of the government Kemi Badenoch was in, and 14 years of Tories. And so she is a woefully incapable leader of the opposition.
Why do you say that?
Because she hates doing interviews, and the one thing that you know, if you're in government, you wake up and say, what can I do today? If you're in opposition, you wake up and say, what can I say today? Kemi Badenoch says, I can't do anything, and I'm not saying that. And so nobody gets any impact out of her. She doesn't like the media. She doesn't seem to like people that much. And I just think that she's destined to fail, because she can't explain what happened last time. She can't explain what she wants to do now. And she doesn't like communicating very much.
And yet that's kind of your number one job as an alternative government in waiting.
I think she's an intelligent person. I think if I was sat listening to her for an hour, I'd really enjoy it. I listened to lots of her long-form podcasts when she ran for leader. I thought she was fascinating, but she's not capable of being leader of the opposition, because I don't think she has enough guts, and I don't think that she's able to explain what happened in a convincing enough way.
There's still an awful lot of Conservatives, and many on that front bench, who still don't really accept that they basically gifted the government, the electoral victory to Labour. There was not. I mean, I know your lot. You know, you go, oh yeah, wonderful Labour government. You know, let's all get really excited about it. The vast majority of people in this country, even you looking at the polls, when it actually came to the day, people were like, I'm not going to vote for this bunch of losers. I mean, and that the poll ratings have absolutely collapsed.
They haven't collapsed. They haven't, because Labour only got, what, 34%?
Yeah, but it collapsed from, they were supposed to be like, around 40-odd%, collapsed to 34% on the day, and has gone down ever since then.
My money is on Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister in 2029. I think that's going to happen. But I tell you what, Kemi Badenoch sure ain't, because she won't even be leader of the Tory party by then.
I think a lot of people are saying that. Kemi Badenoch, welcome on the show, by the way, for any interviews at any time. Let's get to phone lines. Mark is in Lincolnshire. Mark, you want to talk about this idea of uniting the right. Do you think it's going to happen?
No, it isn't, because there is no right, is there?
What do you mean?
If I'm given a choice at the next election of voting between the Tories or Reform, then I might as well vote the Tories. I might as well vote the tried and trusted centrist party as opposed to the new wave centrist party, because that's all Reform are now. He's made that quite clear.
In what way? This is one of the criticisms that Rupert Lowe and his supporters are making. What's centrist about his policies? I mean, not that I think being centrist where the centre of British voters are, as opposed to where Westminster is, which is hard left, basically.
Well, yeah, Westminster is hard left. Certainly Labour are. Basically, what I'm really referring to here is he's basically gone back on pretty much everything that got him where he is today.
Like what?
Well, immigration.
What's he gone back on?
He's softened his approach on immigration. He's not going to mass deport anybody, is he?
He was never talking about mass deporting people.
Yes, he was. He was talking about getting rid of illegal immigrants in the country, the 1 million. That's all the rhetoric he used to come out with all the time with reform. That's why he got to where he is at the end of the day.
I don't think he was ever... I mean, my recollection is he wasn't talking about mass deportations of like millions of people, including people who've got kids who were born here. I think he's talked about the practicalities of that.
No, he was talking about basically what the argument was initially with reform was deporting people, basically the illegals that come over in boats. Yeah. That's what the actual reference was. That's what Farage had always said he was going to do. Okay, that's
people who arrive illegally, as opposed to people who have overstayed visas, which is actually a large number of people, much larger.
Yeah. To get rid of the 2 to 3 million or wherever it is that are just here illegally through visas and all the rest of it, that would take 10 years, 15 years to do that. So I appreciate the position on that. However, he's also gone back on the removing those that have come over in the boats in the last 5 years, the 200,000, that kind of figure.
I don't think he has.
That's a big no-no to me.
I don't think he has. Policy. I really don't think he has gone back on that.
Well, ask him, Julia. Ask him directly.
It's too late now. He was on a couple of hours ago. What else? Because again, you've got to have practical policies. And here's the thing: if Nigel Farage just bangs on every single day about illegal migrants, again, he was the one who raised those issues and went out on the channel in the dinghy and went, look what's actually happening. And everyone else in the media were just like, oh, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Same with grooming gangs. Again, he was as a politician, he was one of the few early on who was speaking about that and kept that in the limelight. And again, a lot of criticism for that. I mean, again, I'm not holding a candle for him, but these are facts.
He cannot keep banging on about illegal migration. That's obviously the case. He has to have other policies, and they have got other policies. But his other policies are essentially the same as the Tories. There is no real difference.
Well, he was the only party pushing for getting rid of dropping net zero at the last election. That was the only option of any party that was going to do that.
Quite frankly, Julia, he will go back on that. I can almost 100%. I can 100% guarantee you he will go back on that. He has become just as much establishment. Reform has become just as much establishment. When you look at yesterday, his announcements, he's bringing in Tories, Labour, Lib Dem. These are people he's bringing in on the council side.
Well, so wait a minute. So you can't bring in anybody who... They have to be a purist who has never once sullied themselves with politics to be allowed to be in the Reform Party.
Julia,
he was a Tory. Now, Dice was a Tory.
You're supposed to be grassroots. That was the whole idea of reform.
But you can be grassroots, but he's not. I mean, councillors are grassroots. They're local people in their local area who stand for election.
Yeah, and you stood for it on the basis that you're a Labour supporter or you're a Tory supporter or you're a Lib Dem supporter.
Yeah.
That's how you stood for it, or you're an independent. Yeah. If an independent...
A lot of the people who came over were independents. Mark, I'd love to debate this long with you. I'm going to have to go to a break. I'm already far too late for a break. But thank you so much for your call. Do call in again. We will have this conversation again. I very much hope. That's Mark in Lincolnshire. Right now, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
You don't want to miss out on the gig of the decade and, of course, a small matter of £10,000. Good luck with that. Right now, we'll take a quick break. Up next, going to be talking to the great Andrew Fox about what is going on in Israel and his hopes for that Trump-Putin phone call about Ukraine. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:38 is the time. Let's turn our attention to international affairs right now with Andrew Fox. He's a defence expert and a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. A very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Well, we've got two big issues, the two ongoing wars we're talking about today. Let's start with that phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that's taking place a little bit later today. 2 hours have been timetabled in. We're told that actually there's already been quite a lot that's been divided up and discussed between Putin and Donald Trump already. But what are your hopes / fears in terms of what is going to be agreed, if anything, by those two of the most powerful men in the world?
I suspect this is a bit of theatre. I don't think anything decisively will be agreed in one phone call. There'll have been a huge amount of back-channeling and direct negotiations over the last week, and they'll have a pretty good idea what they're going to agree on. My big fear is that what they're going to agree on is giving Putin whatever he wants. The Americans have not played a clever hand. We've seen them smash Ukraine, demand concession after concession from them. And when they haven't agreed, they've cut off intelligence and arms and led directly to the deaths of Ukrainian civilians. Yeah. And if that's how low they're pitching the bar for their behaviour, I've got pretty low expectations that we're going to see what looks like a good result out of this.
Well, we were speaking to Seb Gorka, senior advisor to Donald Trump, a little bit earlier on the show, and he was saying, what do you want us to do? If we're going to have a mineral deal, there'll be, he said, thousands of Americans working in Ukraine. That would provide a better guarantee than any piece of paper that could be meaningless. What would you say to that?
I'd say they're asking Ukraine not only to give up territory, but also to give up their resources. They're being divvied up by America and Russia. I'd say it's truly shameful.
This is kind of 19th century old school, stuff, isn't it?
It's a return to the great power era, where great powers can do what they want and smaller countries have to like it or lump it. And I don't like using words like shameful because I don't think that's those moral judgments are essentially not very helpful in my line of work. But I think this one is just past the pale. It's atrocious.
Yeah, I think shameful is. I am mortified for Donald Trump and for the White House and for American people. This is what's happening. I'm also mortified that European nations and our governments and voters have been, colluding with this, haven't stepped up over recent years, increased their defence spending, relying on taxpayers in America to fund our defence here in Europe, and not able to actually provide proper military, serious aid to protect Ukraine. Shame on us as well.
And yeah, just because it's terrible now doesn't mean that we haven't got to share our degree of culpability for this, because what we've done is given Ukraine just enough weaponry to keep fighting, but not enough to have a decisive effect on the battlefield. So that's been really poor. And of course, the Ukrainians do have to take some blame in the sense that they had their big summer offensive and blew it, quite frankly. And obviously the Kursk expedition perhaps wasn't the most sensible move when you've got limited equipment and personnel. So there's a fair bit of blame to go around.
Well, there was a lot of talk to seize some Russian territory, that would help them in any future negotiations to get more land back. I mean, as it is, it would appear, Putin was able to call on North Koreans and others, and was able to boost his manpower in a way that, of course, Ukraine wasn't.
And he was able to call on Washington. I don't think that Kursk pocket would have collapsed had the Americans not withdrawn everything they did.
Yeah.
It was absolutely facilitated by the White House too. So Mr. Putin has all the cards, Ukraine has none. Yeah. And it's a desperately depressing situation.
I mean, we're often told, and again, it's something that Seb Gorka said, it's something that Donald Trump says all the time, do you want peace or not? You keep talking about the meat grinder, how terrible it is that people are dying on the ground in Ukraine. And of course it is. I would have thought the person who cared most about that would be the Ukrainian people themselves and their leader, Zelensky. But the question is, you can end a war at any time. I mean, you can lay down your weapons, you can wave the white flag, you can give the aggressor everything they want, and you can ask them to stop punching you in the face. You can do that. But at what cost? What is a reasonable cost? What would be reasonable in your eyes for Ukraine to give away to stop the fighting?
I mean, it's not my decision. I can draw a line in the sand wherever I want to. It's down to the Ukrainian people, and all the polls show that they want to fight on, even without American backing. A clear majority in favour of that position in the recent Ipsos poll for The Economist. And look, if sovereignty and freedom and your country aren't worth fighting for, then what is? You know, these are basic human drivers when it comes for warfare, and I think of all the reasons to go to the war, those are probably the most noble.
And this isn't about, again, I think a lot of people in Britain and America don't really understand, this isn't about, oh, you just have a different flag, and, you know, and might have just some different representatives on the world stage. This is about people's daily lives in terms of their safety, their individual freedoms, and their economic future, in terms of wanting to be a democratic nation, move to the West, have what we've got, or live under this totalitarian Russian regime.
Yeah, that has used chemical weapons, that has abducted hundreds of thousands of women and children, that has murdered indiscriminately, that's used sexual assault as a method of attack, that has targeted civilians, targeted civilian infrastructure deliberately. And we know all this. It's not comparable to Gaza, where we know there's the enemy weaponizing those things like hospitals and schools. You know, these are just standalone hospitals that have been targeted. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And the fact that the White House is getting into bed with the monster who did all this stuff is a real low point in American foreign affairs, quite frankly.
Yeah, I've got to say I couldn't agree with you more. Again, what's fascinating, though, is how strong Donald Trump is on as I'm going to point to Seb Gurkha, how strong he is on Israel. What do you make of two developments we've had in the last 24 hours in terms of Israel? We've seen massive airstrikes, the biggest since the ceasefire first began in January on Gaza. Fascinating that the reports I was watching and listening to today on BBC and Sky News, also go through lots of different media, all about, up to, I think the figures now, over 400 people are believed to have died, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. Not bothering to mention that actually Israel was targeting and killed, it is believed, 10 senior Hamas figures who, of course, would have been surrounded by, not one man with a gun, but plenty of men with guns. So actually, a large number of those people who died would have been military figures, clearly legitimate military targets. But what do you also make of David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary? Still find that fact extraordinary, but last night he accused Israel of breaking international law, basically for being a breach of international law because of failing to allow in humanitarian aid.
There's no obligation under international law to allow in aid that is being repurposed by your enemy. It's that straightforward. Mr. Lammy's got it completely wrong, unfortunately. But in terms of the strikes last night, we know a number of very senior Hamas officials have been killed, and Gazan sources are actually confirming this. So we've seen the commander of the Rafah brigades, the spokesman for Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the deputy interior minister, and others. So it's been a kind of good night in terms of targeting, in terms of the number of people that have died. Obviously, we do know there's bound to have been civilians that have been caught up in this, and that's the eternal tragedy of war, unfortunately, is that civilians take the biggest hits.
But lots of people who do march in the streets about sort of war crimes and genocide and all of this, they don't seem to be very bothered by all the people who die, innocents who die in pretty much every other war around the world.
Yeah, it's and they certainly haven't seemed to care about the massacres that are going on in Syria at the moment, which is, I think, notable by their silence. But the key point here is this war would stop immediately if Hamas had released the hostages. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
It really is that simple, isn't it? If they want the war to stop, simple solution. Always good to talk to you, Andrew Fox, defence expert, research fellow there at the Henry Jackson Society. Benjamin Butterworth, your thoughts on what he had to say?
Well, I thought, what a fantastic guest. That was so well informed, so I learned a lot. But when it comes to what's happening,
that's what we do on this show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. So, what's extraordinary about what's happening in Gaza is that, of course, Israel has caused a huge amount of damage to Gaza. Lots of people have lost their lives, including innocent people. And yet Hamas still will put the people of Gaza at risk rather than just release the hostages. There was a ceasefire on the 6th of October a year and a half ago, and they broke it when they attacked Israel. And we, the world, owe Israel a thanks because they are taking the trash out. Well, I was in Syria 2 weeks ago, and while I'm not going to pretend they all love Israel, I tell you what, they were damn grateful for what Israel has been doing to damage Hezbollah and to damage Iran and to damage Hamas. When I went to Lebanon last year, just before Israel attacked, in fact, I stayed in an Airbnb, and at the door the two guys there said, you can come in, but you better not be one of those Hamas Westerners. We love Israel in this house because it's our only chance of freedom. And so the actual people in the Middle East, they don't want want these monsters to have any more power. They're not boycotting.
A lot of the monsters, I hate to tell you, an awful lot of civilians in Gaza are very big fans of Hamas.
Well, but in the rest of the region, the good people there are desperate for these people to be overthrown, and they're glad of what Israel is doing.
Indeed. And again, it's a simple matter. Even if they weren't desperate, I don't care. They're terrorists, and I want them all dead. I'm old-fashioned. 12:48 is the time. Up next, we're going to be talking about those so-called stranded astronauts, Butch and Sunny, who have begun their return back to Earth. They're going to land back in the ocean roughly before 10 p.m. tonight. But were they ever really stranded in space for 9 months? That's up next with Andy Lamb. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
A chairman of a company supposedly based in Aberdeen, who himself is based in Manchester, where the video was filmed in London. The whole thing's farcical. Nobody knows what GB Energy actually is. It isn't great, it isn't British, and it's not going to produce any energy. It's why we voted against it in the House of Commons. It's going to cost £8 billion at a time when we're scrabbling to find the money to build the tanks, the drones, and get more soldiers, sailors and airmen into the place that we need to become more secure as a country. And it's going to do nothing to improve our energy security or drive down bills.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Just let you know that the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall has been on her feet in the House of Commons, finally announcing his long-awaited long-trail benefits reform. So far, she's confirmed that the government will reform eligibility for PIP benefits. These are benefits for long-term sick and disabled, so that only the most severely disabled can make claims. So none of you, mostly, I've got a bit of depression, I've got a bit of anxiety, and might have autism, is going to pass the grade. We're told, we'll see if that works out, people will need to score 4 points in at least one activity to qualify for the daily living allowance for PIP. This will hit, they say, some 1 million people. This is where the bulk of the £5 billion savings are going to come from. Also announcing merging job seekers allowance with employment and support allowance. And as I say, the work capability assessment will also be scrapped in 2028. She said the government is going to legislate, this had been trailed, to introduce a right to try. This means benefit claimants will be able to seek work and try out a new job without being fearful of losing their financial support. Because I think Fraser Nelson did a brilliant documentary exposing this, that you can be on the benefits, you're like, right, I'm ready to go back to work, you get a job to go back to work, and actually you might, it might not work out, or you might actually have problems you didn't foresee going back to work, and then you've lost all your benefits, you have to start all over again. And so people are very wary of risking that. But anyway, the standard universal credit allowance is going to rise by £775 by 2029, 2030. Whether that's in line with inflation, well, we'll wait to see what inflation is going to be, won't we? Anyway, that's what's been coming out of the House of Commons. We'll no doubt be talking an awful lot about that later in the on the station in here at Talk, but also I'll be talking about it on my show tomorrow. Right now, let's turn our attention to the small matter of two astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who have been stuck in space, we've been told, for more than 9 months. They left the International Space Station today on their 17-hour journey back to Earth. They're due to splash down in the ocean just before 10 o'clock UK time tonight. Well, let's talk about this with space commentator Andy Lound. A very good afternoon to you, Andy.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I was fascinated to read, and I only learnt this a week ago when there was talk about, right, the SpaceX rocket was supposed to go up, then they finally got it up, ready with a bunch of other astronauts to drop off at the International Space Station and give space to bring Suni and Butch home. That they haven't actually been stranded, and all this talk about how they haven't been able to get home and now they're being rescued by Elon Musk and SpaceX is all an abject load of nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really. It's quite interesting. It's interesting looking at the different media outlets, which they're saying, and having to comment. So, talk about the stranded astronauts. They're not stranded.
Yeah.
They weren't. They went up to test the spacecraft. The spacecraft was the Boeing Starliner, a rather nice little spacecraft. It had thruster problems, so they were a bit risky bringing it back in case things went wrong. So they decided to bring the spacecraft back on its own, leave the two astronauts on board.
Who were supposed to be there for 8 days,
yes,
and then come back,
And then the idea was then, instead of bringing them back straight away with another mission, they said, no, what we'll do is, because it'll be cheaper, because NASA have to worry about the budgets, is they'll become 2 of the 4 astronauts as part of mission number 9, which was due to go to the space station, which brought 2 astronauts, a load of equipment for these people, including a change of clothes, which is a bit useful.
Apparently they didn't have any of their own luggage on the first flight, so it was quite nice to get your own knickers.
That's right. So all they did was then they simply took over the duties for that session, for that mission.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And they were both fully qualified astronauts.
So they didn't need to be. They didn't need to be. They were only planning to be there 8 days. There was a mishap with the rocket. It was too unsafe to risk bringing human beings back in it. But basically, from what I can understand, we're talking about a few £100 million or dollars it would have cost to have brought them back early and have a special mission to go to space to collect them and bring them home, as opposed to the mission that was already planned with astronauts. So they left 2 spaces free. Those other astronauts joined them, and they've done the work for the last 6 months.
That's right. It's as simple as that, really. It's a simple way of scheduling. In fact, Elon Musk said that if he could send a spacecraft up to bring them back if they wanted to. NASA chose not to do that. They wanted to do it the way they wanted to do it, and simple as that, really.
But also, don't lots of astronauts actually? I think apparently one of the worst things for Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and others was they were, after they'd walked on the moon, they were never allowed to go into space again, which was the great joy of their life, because of course they couldn't risk anything happening to them. Then actually, the astronauts love to go into space. It's what they train to do, and getting to be in space longer. I think she's broken a record, hasn't she, for the longest time any female astronaut has been outside the space capsule, longest spacewalk. So actually, they wanted to stay.
They were quite happy to. The people that suffer the most are their families back on Earth who miss the parties, who miss the Christmas dues. But let's be honest. You can think of worse places to be if you're going to have to extended work time. One of the worst places you could be would be down here, probably on the Earth at the moment.
I have to say, I've stayed in worse bedsits over my lifetime than the International Space Station. Talk to me just very briefly about the impact on them, because they've been in space a long time, and we know they've got all this equipment to try and keep muscle mass and bone mass up. But the changes to their bodies will be huge after that length of time.
Yes, they will. They'll have to get used to 1G gravity again, and they need to sort themselves out for that. That'll be quite an important element. They'll go through full medical checks to make sure they're actually quite healthy and they're quite happy. They'll have to get used to a new diet regime, of course, because now they can eat more, because you have a very strict diet once you're in space as well. So they'll get used to it. And apparently one astronaut actually made a comment, said the most difficult thing he found was he forgot about gravity, because in space, if you've got a cup of a cup of something, you let it go and let it float, and apparently he started to do that on the Earth, and things were falling on the ground. So it's those silly adaptations you've got to get back used to.
And when you've been away for so long, it's absolutely extraordinary. Of course, there'll be so much testing about, we know there's radiation issues, there are long-term issues in terms of muscle mass, bone density and the like. But these people, a lot of these people, they trained as jet pilots first. They live for this thrill. This is what they love to do.
I mean, you and I both go up there if we had the opportunity.
Oh, totally. I would totally do it.
Absolutely. So, throw our hats in the ring. Come on. If we want to go up for the journalists to the moon.
I'm not sure I'd pass the training right now, but there we are. Well, I might improve the hair. I don't know. Andy Lowndes, space commentator. Always great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Benjamin Butterworth, would you go up into space if you got the opportunity?
I'd like to say yes, but I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was locked in a hotel room for 3 days with food poisoning, and that was hell enough. So the idea of 9 months up there, no.
Yeah, but probably a better view from the International Space Station. Would you do it? Ian Collins is here.
I thought that was Andre Walker for a second.
I mean, can I just say, the wife would absolutely send you up, wouldn't she?
Oh, she'd be delighted. Yeah, you're going to be gone for 3 years and 7 months, really.
What do you mean you're back after 8 days? Yeah.
I know, that wasn't meant to be.
Would you do it? I would. If I these multi-millionaires and billionaires who pay like 200 million to be in space, I would